Welcome to Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup. I'm your host, Jason Bland, and tonight we have guest Paul Wallace. He's author of Escaping from Eden, and I've been so psyched to do this show because I haven't read the book. It's not out till April, but the subject matter is probably, I say I have a lot of things I'm interested in. Well, this is probably like the number one, is ancient aliens and the idea of them and in the Bible. If you're Christian, I ask you to have an open mind. But I myself, since I was a kid in sixth grade, I got my hands on the book Eric Von Daniken's Chariots of the God. I've always questioned and been very interested in the Bible because I believe there are much evidence in there that we were visited by extraterrestrials in our distant past and still are probably now. This is the subject we're going to get into. Paul has been on Gaia TV. I am so psyched to have him on. And of course, we got a lot of weird to get to. Actually, I have an extra article tonight, some breaking news for the World Wide Web of Weird. So we need to get to that. And of course, we will open up the phone lines after our second commercial break. And I'll give those phone numbers out then. But let's go ahead and get rolling into the show. Welcome to another night of Paranormal Soup. As I said before, I'm your host, Jason Bland. Tonight's guest, Paul Wallace, will join us after the World Wide Web of Weird, our news segment. If you're new to the show, like I said, there's a lot of weird to get to. And my weird but beautiful co-host is Jamie D. is with us right now. How you doing tonight, Jamie?
I'm doing well, thank you.
You know, this is my favorite topic out of all the topics. I mean, I love ghosts. I'm a paranormal investigator. You'd think ghosts would be, but actually the ancient aliens topic is probably my favorite topic. I go to bed to Ancient Aliens, the show. Now, I know there's a lot of crap in that show. I know they construe things sometimes, but I still like the premise. So it's from St. Augustine, Florida, of course, running the World Wide Web of Weird is Rob Autry himself. How you doing tonight, Rob?
Doing great, and definitely looking forward to this topic, like you say.
Yeah, that's so excited. I had a guest cancel, and the spot opened up, and I got a contact from Gavin Lee Davies. Thank you very much for this guest. Help set this up, so very thank you to Gavin. So I'm excited to do that. But like I said, I have a lot of weird to get to, so let's go ahead and roll into the World Wide Web of Weird. Tonight on the World Wide Web of Weird, again, this is our coronavirus update. That's what I want to say, because I've done the coronavirus like the last 4 shows, but there's still more going on in my paranoid brain. Little hypochondriac. I'm a little bit scared of this coronavirus thing, so I can't help but cover it. And there's just more weirdness that happens with it going on. Maybe it's not paranormal, but it freaks me out.
Yeah.
for those listening on our paranormal radio app, Paranormal Soup, there we are a webcast. You can watch us on Facebook or YouTube. We show videos and pictures, but mainly we read the articles and or kind of gloss over them and get an idea of what we're talking about. So if you just want to listen, go ahead and listen, but you can come watch and join our YouTube and Facebook chat rooms. We can show your messages right up here on the screen using StreamYard, which costs money, by the way, people. So help us out, $2 a month on our Patreon account. Look up Paranormal Soup. Does help pay for this. So anything you can do to help is a great deal. Sharing the show is the biggest way to help. But let's go ahead. All right. So first article here. Let me pull that up. Oh, it's showing. Why is it showing me? You have me up, Rob.
I have you up.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's weird. I am weird. First article: deadly coronavirus may be spreading through poop. And I love this little title they got at the end. At the end of that, wash your goddamn hands. According to a report published by the Chinese Center of Disease Control and Prevention, China CDC last week, researchers were able to confirm COVID-19 patients had live viruses in their stool specimen, suggesting that the vicious virus called 2019 nCoV can be transmitted through fecal matter. Let's just call it, coronavirus. I don't know. Spread through only respiratory droplets and contact transmissions weren't able to fully account for all the cases of deadly coronavirus, according to the report, leading to researchers examining other ways the virus spreads. This virus may have many routes of transmission. That's great, right? Which can partially explain its strong transmission and fast transmission speed. I don't believe. Oh, what happened to your screen? What is that?
That is weird, is what that is. I don't know.
Like melted. Did your computer melt? Okay, I don't know.
Let me reshare.
I like the little poop emojis with the article. Oh no, let's see what happened, because we got more stuff. I didn't even set my stuff up tonight either. There we go. Well, there's so much going on with this coronavirus. I can't even cover it all. I mean, one of the articles I thought about covering too and talk about is, our CDC went against our Trump administration, who wanted to let people in, and they did. The CDC said, well, we have no involvement in this. They let people with coronavirus into our country from a cruise ship. That's great. And it shows such great confidence in our government when you have one branch, one department, the CDC, going against and saying, we have nothing to do with this. When they're the Centers of Disease Control, such confidence in how they're handling this. Oh, it freaks me out. I work with the public, so I see people every day. I'm just constantly using that damn hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on. I know I keep covering the coronavirus because I'm slightly hypochondriac. Okay, let's move on. Speaking of, this would be a hypochondriac's worst nightmare. Anybody just grossed out by just bodily fluids and disease. A mystery black substance running down the walls turned out to be blood from upstairs. Two men were horrified, and this is from metro.co.uk. Two men were horrified when a dark substance with a horrible smell started dripping down their wall was actually the blood of an upstairs neighbor who had died more than a week earlier. I have other pictures here of it too. AJ McCready tweeted pictures and videos of the stains at his apartment in Minneapolis, Minnesota, saying it smelled horrible. Recently, he and his flatmate called a maintenance team to investigate, who discovered the decomposing body of their neighbor. Authorities said the black-like tar liquid was bodily fluids that had leaked to the floor into AJ's flat. Oh my God. He had flatmates. Ivan Schultz told Twitter followers about the grim discovery, with AJ saying, "My apartment has smelled horrible recently. I just found out the guy living above me has been dead for over a week." And before you ask, his body was just discovered after his blood leaked down the ceiling into our apartment this morning. He later added, all we really know of the situation is the man upstairs died in his sleep. His decomposing body somehow managed to seep into our apartment. We've had leaking. That's not right. We've had leaking in our bed. Somebody typo. Come on. We've had leaking. That's not me. This is the article. Man, who edits this? We've had leaking in our bathroom. So when we saw this, we called maintenance immediately. Yeah, that's what you would do. Managing those maintenance men. AJ said at first the maintenance workers had no idea what the substance leaked down the wall. They just keep repeating the same stuff. Horribly written, but interesting. When a short time I was on the police department, they made us watch videos, kind of prepping us for what we will eventually see going on to a crime scene or just a death scene, and it is incredible what happens to the body just laying in a bed or whatever. It's been left there for a week or two. And what happens to the body fluids, and like the person will get, especially if they're overweight, like their body like gets smushed if they're laying on one side. It's really yeah. I was really like, oh, this is horrible. I'm watching these people and these death scenes. I was like, this is horrible. And they're playing like this music. This is at a police department. They're playing like this, like 1970s. I don't know what song was like. I don't know. I don't remember what it was.
Chips or something.
I don't know. It was something really cheesy and corny, and they're playing this, and I'm like, wow. Okay, this is why I'm not a cop. Okay, let's move on.
Hand me a couple cans of that potted meat.
All right, we got some ghost stuff now. An abandoned school security guard heard voices and a CCTV spots a ghost. Surveillance video of an apparent ghost was taken at an empty school in Armenia after the security guard heard voices of children in early hours and called police to investigate. According to YouTube channel The Secret Underbelly 2.0, that's where you can find this video. The ghost is seen walking into the door, and it looks like if it backs up and down. The footage was released by a security guard of the school in Armenia on February 2nd. To the Secret Underbelly 2.0. Go ahead and play this, and you'll see what I say. Now you see it, and it's probably not. Go to Hidden Underbelly 2.0 to get a really good look at it, and you'll see what I mean. It looks spooky. It looks like it's flying around, but you see how it like kind of sparkles out as it gets out of the lens, either when it goes up or down. In the video description of this, I think that's Underbelly, that it's not a bug. No, I really think it's a bug. Yeah. If you get a look at it, you can almost see like little wings and legs when you actually see the video, the full quality of the video. I honestly think it's a bug. I mean, they look weird when they get in the IR light. It might not be. I could be wrong. They point out is that it kind of looks like it goes in and out of the door at one point, but that could be just it getting in and out of the IR light.
Or a web that's just slowly blowing if it's a piece of something.
Well, it looks like it's crawling on a web or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like a spider, though. It looks more like kind of a cockroachy or something. Here it is. Like,
they say
it goes in the door. They say it goes in the door and then it comes back out. But honestly, I think it's it going in and out of the IR light that's reflecting on it. So first, I first thoughts is it's probably a bug.
Yeah, it's a bug.
But who knows? It could be something. All right, let's move on before we run out of time because we've got a lot tonight. I thought this was kind of spooky. This from Unexplained Mysteries. Police respond to reports of demonic sounds. Officers were called out to investigate a very strange incident in Pueblo, Colorado on February 13th. The bizarre incident, which took place around 3:30 a.m., saw employees at a local branch McDonald's call emergency service after being spooked by demonic sounds. According to the report, the sounds, which were described as being like strange language combined with unnerving barking, were coming from an unidentified screaming woman. The employees were so shaken by the incident that they refused to leave the building until the morning. A total of 3 officers attended the scene and conducted a thorough search of the area. However, despite their best efforts, they were unable to determine who or what produced the sound. Some local media users have likened the incident to La Llorona, an infamous wailing ghost of Latin America folklore who's said to scream in anguish and torment, with no definitive explanation forthcoming. However, the case continues to remain unsolved. And there's like a post here we got from the police department posted on their Twitter about the incident. I love it when police are involved in all that stuff. I mean, it could have been anybody just standing outside their building acting crazy and screaming, but I don't know. Did Lola Llorona want a Happy Meal? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe she found her kids finally, and then they got mad, and I don't know, because she wanted a Happy Meal. They wanted a Happy Meal, and she was going to give it to them. Start screaming at the brats. I don't know. Lola Llorona, if you don't know, is the lady in white, who drowned her children or something like that, and is continually searching for her. Spotted. What's crazy about that is she's spotted all over. It started in Mexico, but we got it here in Indiana. I mean, it's all over the country. This was what did I say? Colorado? Yeah, Colorado. But I love the Lola Llorona stories. But anybody could have been screaming outside. I would have gone out and looked. Yeah, it's crazy. Most people are like, no, I'm not going to look. I totally get why they didn't, but I would have totally had to look. I couldn't just stand in there and like, what? I mean, what if somebody's getting murdered?
Yeah.
They heard demonic sounds of screaming. I mean, somebody could be getting murdered. I'm just saying, if you hear screaming, you might want to peek out and call 911. I mean, they did call
I ain't
911.
going outside until the sun comes up.
If you hear gunshots, then don't go out and look.
Yeah.
Just call 911. Okay, let's move on here. All right, this next one. Speaking of demonic screams, now we got a Bigfoot scream. Terrifying Bigfoot screams recorded in Ohio. We've had these before. It's from Ohio, I think. Recently uploaded video captures some interesting and unnerving sounds coming from the woods. When you're living alone in a remote region of the forest, there are some sounds that you definitely don't want to hear. And I agree with this. These terrifying cries coming from somewhere nearby is a prime example. I love the video of the one kid. I hear it's like the weird sound. It's like, see him walking in, Mom, you know. Yeah. But and that I thought was coyotes. This is one of those screams that I've heard before. You've heard people say this is Bigfoot, and they play this sound, and this is what it sounds like. So go ahead and play it. And now, I'm not a wildlife person at all. Thoughts? I mean, coyote. I mean, what is that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it could be some sort of coyote or big wolf or something. Who knows? But it could be too.
Yeah, I am not a wildlife expert. I have no idea. This is from the person who took it. I was inside my house feeding my dog, and me and my dog were both curious as to what we were hearing outside. I ran outside as fast as I could to try to understand what it was, but I couldn't understand what I was hearing because I never heard anything like this before near the woods at my house. And you know, if he's never heard this before, that makes it interesting. This video is not fake. I swear this just happened out of the middle of nowhere randomly. As Steen said, it's unclear exactly what type of creature could have made the sounds. Damn, sounds like Bigfoot. It's is getting a Brazilian wax, one user joked. Dogman is in the area, another warned. Please stay safe out there. Don't go out at night. Lock those windows and doors. I would definitely lock my windows and doors. I would not be, you know, you're hearing that. I would be freaked. Yeah. Sounds like my mom sounds like a forlorn dog.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of has that dog.
It does have a dog sound. Yeah, I kind of felt that way too.
Kind of that.
But I'm not a wildlife expert at all. If it is, man, oh.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, sound can travel so far in places like that too. You know.
My mom points out dogs can make a very odd sounds if they are let up. I was just thinking about we had a dog in our neighborhood that would make some really horrific sounds when people would leave it outside. You want to just yell out your door, let the damn dog inside. You know, I'm tired of hearing it. It's crazy. Yeah. So yeah, it could be definitely a dog.
Yeah,
just
I'm kind of thinking maybe dogs.
Even a hunting dog, you know, that got lost or something. All
right, we got to move on here. So let's go to the next thing. This is another triangle UFO in Texas. This is from Daily Star. Triangle UFO returns Texas as 3 red lights appear over a motorway. This is a really interesting video. A mysterious triangle UFO seems to have returned to the skies of Texas after a motorist filmed 3 red lights and flashing above his car. The bizarre footage shows a strange object seemingly moving towards the camera person in the night sky of Bogota. As it moves overhead, it clearly has a triangle complexion. That's the word you use. But then zooms off seconds later. The sighting bears a similarity to a giant triangular craft that was spotted above Houston on New Year's Day. That followed another video of bizarre-shaped UFOs above New York at the end of last year. In the description of the sighting, which was posted to MUFON UFO Network, the user explained that the aircraft was hovering 30 feet above the ground. Now, this looks like it's higher than 30 feet above the ground. That would be pretty low. This definitely looks higher, but maybe, I don't know. It's hard to tell. If you can make the video bigger, Rob, definitely going to need to. And they slow it down. Oh, we lost it.
Crap.
Yeah, hold on a second. Still lost it. No, I don't see it. I don't see the thing to put it up on the screen. Oh, no. We saw it for a split second. You see the red lights. It's got really bright red lights on this thing. There we go. All right, let's see if you can. Make it bigger, maybe. I screwed it up last time. I'm afraid.
Again. Try one more time.
Try it one more time. You can tell this is on a cell phone while they're driving. There it is. Not recommended to drive and try to film a UFO like that, but good effort.
That's pretty freaky looking, man.
I mean, how high up do you think that is? It's really hard to tell. They say they think it's only 30 feet up. It's only 30 feet up, then I don't think it can't be too big. I mean, could be a drone. I don't know.
I think it's higher than that, but it's pretty weird looking.
We live by an airport here, and I'm always seeing like red triangle looking things like that are planes going in and out of the airport. Like I could totally make a video if I wanted. And
my wife recently saw something. She's like, it was so quick. It went by so fast, but it almost looked like it was like 3 red lights. I think that's what she described, or I'm thinking of somebody else. I think my wife said I know she saw something recently. I don't know if that was her description of it or not. All right. We're going to run out of time here. That is interesting, though. The really bright red lights on that thing.
Yeah.
All right. So this next one really interests me. I don't know if I have time to read the whole article. I probably don't. Well, there's a short one. The Japan Space Agency has greenlighted an ambitious mission to retrieve a piece of Mars moon Phobos. Now you think, oh, this is another NASA story. That's getting ahead of what I'm getting to. Go to the article picture. I'm going to get to that. It's related. It's related. Having succeeded in collecting and sending back samples of dust from the Hobbies 2 asteroid JAXA is certainly no stranger to the idea of retrieving pieces of another world. Japanese Space Agency latest endeavor will see it send a robotic spacecraft to Phobos, a tiny 17-mile wide potato-shaped chunk of rock in an orbit around Mars. Once the probe will land, collect a core sample, then set off, return to Earth. And there's more to it in the article. But I find interesting, like I said, you can find this on Unexplained Mysteries. What interests me about them going back there, or what I say, somebody going back there, I'm going to get ahead of myself. What interests me about them going there is the whole Russian story. I don't know if people are familiar with the Russian Phobos 1 and Phobos 2 probes, that we sent. Or not we, Russia sent. It was a joint effort. We had some involvement. Other countries had involvement, but it was mainly Russia's baby. And they sent these probes up to the Phobos moon. And that's the next picture you can show. This is like classic UFO kind of lore, because even some of the Russians, the cosmonauts, came out and talked about this incident, knowing about it. You see that's Phobos there in the middle, that rock. This is from the Russian mission. And you see that white streak of line? Well, that's like the last photo taken. They see this long, huge object suddenly appear in the camera frame, and then they lost contact. They lost contact, I think, with both satellites. Whatever was there did not want them to take a picture of Phobos. And then Carl Sagan had commented on Phobos as an unusual moon. I think our moon's more unusual, but as an unusual moon that could be an artificial structure. So I'm interested in what Japan has now. I think when they say this will be 2024 is as the earliest spacecraft could launch. So then it's going to take, we won't get there till 2025 or something almost. But man, I'm really interested to see what happens with that. Super interested. Because that's one of those just UFO lore stories. It's not lore. I mean, it's real. It happened. Cosmonauts were went out, and I remember holding up a picture of this, saying we encountered something. Of course, the media kept it pretty quiet. But yeah, Phobos 2. Look it up, and I can't wait for Japan to go. We got our guest just joined us. We'll make sure he's there. Are you with us, Paul?
Good day from Australia. I certainly am.
All right, we're getting ready to go to commercial break, but I want to make sure we had you on before we do. We got one more story I got to cover here, though, before we go. This one's late, just breaking today. Daredevil was killed over the weekend with his homemade rocket as it crashed. Mad Mike Hughes, 62, was killed when his steam-powered rocket crashed after a launch near Barstow, California. According to reports, Hughes was attempting to prove the Earth is flat by reaching space in a homemade crowd-funded craft. You remember I covered this guy on the World Wide Web Weird, 2-3 years ago when he first started doing this? And what did I say was going to happen? Here we're going to talk with Paul tonight about ancient aliens, and we're discovering, I think, our new new information more and more about our past and all that stuff. And we're still arguing over if the Earth is flat. I mean, and this guy's life was wasted. wasted, and a stupid death was pointless. Pointless. What? Somebody should have bought him a GoPro and put it on the rocket. I mean, why did he have to go up? It's heartbreak. Honestly, actually, I watched the video of him going up in the rocket. It breaks my heart that this guy did this. He obviously was a very smart person when it came to the mechanics and the tech to do this stuff. But you're not going to crowdfund a rocket launch, man. You're not going to do it. It's really sad. I wouldn't even play the video on here. And I'm sorry. I'm a jerk for playing the stupid death stuff, but it's stupid. And if you see the video, you can go watch it. And it's just watching a guy just throw his life away. I mean, you're dedicated. He was definitely dedicated. Yeah, but dude. Why are we still arguing over flat Earth? I just don't know. All this time, we're still arguing over flat Earth. But that's it for the World Wide Web of Weird. If you want to send me hate emails, you can email me at paranormalsoupjbland@gmail.com. Tell me what a jerk I am. That's fine. But that's it. We're going to have our guest here. Paul is going to join us after this commercial break. And after the second commercial break, we'll open up the phone lines. You can call in, ask questions, and join the conversation. But we will be back after this short commercial break.
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do Voices from Beyond, the Cold Case Files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Bring life to the dead. 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 Enter the occult world of necromancy. You were brought here for one purpose: necromancy.
A ceremony dating back to the pre-Christian era is the art of reviving the dead. It requires involvement with evil spirits by the person performing the act.
The devil god brings life to the dead.
No, please. No, please.
And death to the living. Necromancy, starring Orson Welles and Pamela Franklin. From Cinerama releasing. In color, rated PG, parental guidance suggested.
The international chart-topping Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest has been described as terrifyingly real, a must-read, shocking and chilling brilliance, genuinely worrying, utterly frightening. Don't read before bed. Described as one of the spookiest writers out there, best-selling author G.L. Davies presents Haunted, Horror of Haverfordwest, the true paranormal account that is shocking the world. Dare you enter? Dare you read? Haunted, Horror of Haverfordwest is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, and wherever books are sold. Pray you never have to live there.
He is conducting an experiment into the combined effects of sensory deprivation and hallucinatory drugs. The subject of the experiment is himself, and the experiment is out of control. Ken Russell's Altered States, a film that must not be missed, is in the West End now. Altered States, Certificate X.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like is the extraordinary travels of a young, alone, and broke psychic in the highly anticipated new book from internationally renowned psychic, medium, medical intuitive, and best-selling author Sherry Dillard. Critics have described I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like as an engrossing memoir, an empowering story of how a broken girl came to accept her psychic gift. A refreshing and fun read. I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like is available through Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold.
From deep space, the seed is planted. Terror grows.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Certificate X. Now showing London Pavilion, Classic Oxford Street.
To DCS ranging.
240, nominal to profile.
We're in the pipe, 5 by 5.
Tonight on Paranormal Soup, our guest is Paul Wallace. He's author of Escaping from Eden. Paul Anthony Wallace is a researcher, speaker, author of books of spirituality and mysticism. He researches the world's mythologies of how they speak to our origins as a species and our potential today as human beings. In the 80s and 90s, Paul's work centered on establishing foundations for new faith communities. Over the last 20 years, he's designed and delivered training for church ministries in UK, Australia. In Australia, Paul has lectured on the history of religious thought and Hermichus, I probably butchered that, principles of interpreting texts, including the Bible, and has served as an Anglican church as an archdeacon in Australian Capital Territory. Paul provides a personal coaching to clients in leadership and as a practitioner of healing and Christian traditions. He's a musician, storyteller, an author, a mentor, a conscious breather, and a barefoot walker. Paul is married with 3 children and lives in Australia. His new book, Escaping Eden, will be available April 24th, 2020, and is published through Access Monday Books, part of the John Hunt Publishing. I am so looking forward to reading this book. This is, like I said tonight, one of my all-time favorite topics. Influenced at a very young age by Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. This idea has just, my imagination's gone wild with it ever since I was a kid. So excited. So let's go ahead and get rolling into the show. Welcome to the show, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Jason. It's great to be with you. And hi, Jamie and Rob.
Rob is
Hello.
there. There we go. Jamie, we might have to step away for a second, so hopefully we get Jamie back. But thank you for joining me. We were talking before the show about our love for Chariots of the Gods and how it influenced us. I like I said, I think it was about 6th grade. I got my hands on that book, and it totally influenced me in so many ways. My ideas, about our past and the Bible. It made me want to go back and read the Bible again, just to to see what I can find in there. And there's so much to get into tonight that I just love this topic. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me on the show. It's going to be fun.
Now, how did this, you were a kid, obviously, how old were you when you, I know you told me, but tell the audience, how old were you when you first picked up Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods?
I was 11 years old, and I discovered Erich von Daniken through being invited to one of my mum and dad's dinner parties. And it was a special treat for me and my brother to get invited to those, because they would pull out all the stops with the food for those dinner parties, cook really interesting food. And then the conversation would always be fascinating for us kids to join in on and try and keep up with the grown-up conversation. And I remember this time around encountering Erich von Daniken in the conversation. With his book, Chariots of the Gods, he had really broken a taboo with that book. And he had identified a gap in our ability to explain ourselves as an intelligent, conscious, technological species on planet Earth. And I'd always felt there was a gap there. I'd always felt that the answers I was getting from, say, a religious perspective at my Church of England school seemed a little bit lazy, explaining us. And then if I looked to science, again, there was a gap in the ability to explain. Erich von Daniken named the gap and then put forward his theory as to what could explain our emergence. And it was an external intervention. So my ears pricked up when I heard about him. My mum and dad had a copy of the book, so I went and found that and read it avariciously from cover to cover. And I felt he was really onto something. It was something I was very enthusiastic about. And in a funny way, though, it actually led me to becoming a Christian believer, because after a while I noticed he hadn't addressed some of my ultimate questions of where everything had come from. It sort of moved the question to another planet.
Right.
But
somebody had to create the aliens still.
Yeah, where did the aliens come from? That's right.
Right.
So in a roundabout way, I became a Christian believer and got into the world of ministry. That was my work, as you were just saying, for 33 years. And yet all the time was thinking, actually, my Christian faith hasn't answered all of the questions that Erich von Daniken raised. And I need to get back to them at some point. And finally, ultimately, after a long, long time, I did get back and start drilling down into some of the really important questions that he asked. And along the way, I'd noticed heaps and heaps of interesting moments in the Bible, because you mentioned I was lecturing pastors, teaching them how to interpret ancient texts. And so I'd keep coming across these anomalies that did not fit with the stories we tell from the Bible, and realized that they were the vestiges of an earlier story still embedded in the text. And so I had to get back and drill down into those and work out what was really going on.
The way when I was a kid, and I grew up in a very open household. Like as my mom pointed out, it was her book that I found. I think she had it here because your mother owned the copy. Yep. Because my mom's awesome, and I grew up in a very open household and that. But I did go to like some Sunday schools, and I would, to me, as even a little kid, I could understand the gaps, or the problems, like Noah's Ark. How is he going to fit every species of animal on a boat? How are they going to live? I mean, just simple questions kids ask.
Exactly. If you pick up a children's Bible and sit down with a child, you will quickly discover all the anomalies in the stories.
Exactly.
And when it came to Noah's Ark, my problem wasn't how could you get the animals in there? It was, why would God genocide everybody?
I didn't understand genocide as a child, but now as an adult,
crime
yes,
we can imagine with our human minds, the worst thing is genocide, but God can do it. And by the time you get to Genesis 6 and the flood, you've actually skipped over a whole load of other problems. A child will say, why does God say, let us make? Who's the us?
Right.
Let us make humans to look like one of us. Or one of who? And then how could God create woman as an afterthought? Not realize that man would need woman? That doesn't make sense. And then the snake, who's the snake? Well, why did God make him? Couldn't he see that would be a problem? And couldn't he see what was going to happen when I, a child, can see what's going to happen? And then the death penalty for eating a piece of fruit, that can't be right.
Well, it's like, I mean, you have a child and you stick something out in front of them nice and shiny and bright, and you say, don't touch that. Don't touch that. Don't touch that. What are they going to do? They're going to touch it. You tell them don't eat it. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to eat it. If you keep telling them not to, guess what? They're going to eventually be tempted to. I guess that is the human nature.
Absolutely. So when kids ask us these questions, as we read through these stories, a lot of us think, we'll give our answer as best we can, and then we'll think, gee, I need to look into that. That doesn't quite make sense. And at some point, you need the time to actually do it. And I was very fortunate to be given some time to drill down into all these things that really didn't fit, that morally don't make sense in those stories. And I later found through my research that all those anomalies are really the vestiges of an earlier story. And when we drill down into the translation, there's a certain key that resolves all of them. But I just had to take the time to do it.
And would this key kind of just does it show you what the origins are?
Yeah, it does, absolutely. The key for me was discovering how the word Elohim works in the text. Now, Elohim is one of the words that gets translated as God in the Hebrew scriptures, but it's a very unusual word. It's a plural. Yeah, sounds plural.
Sorry.
That's right. Sounds like a masculine plural.
Yes.
And not only that, it often takes plural verb forms and then exhibits plural behaviors. And then you realize there are plural agendas going on. So you've got the let us make humans to look like one of us. We don't want them to become too much like one of us, etc., etc. So I started looking at that, and I was thinking there must be an answer to that. So I went to some Bible scholars, some very eminent Bible translators, to ask what's happening with this word. And what I discovered was that there is no way you can regard that word as a simple singular. It is most probably a plural word. And in the earlier version of the stories, it would have acted as a plural. Now, there's another word that gets used for God in the text, and it's the holy name revealed to Moses, centuries, maybe millennia after all the action that's described in those stories. So when you see the holy name, Yahweh, in those early texts, what that shows the reader is that somebody after the time of Moses has reworked all these stories into their current form. But it's all done in plain sight. So once you realize that, you have to ask, okay, well, what was the original version of the stories that this editor reworked? And the answer is, they were the stories of the Elohim. And so when my ultimate Frisbee injury took me out of action for a while and gave me some time to study, I asked myself, what happens if I read these stories of beginnings, which are mainly Genesis 1 to 11, but it applies all through the Hebrew scriptures. What happens if I read Elohim as a plural? How do the stories change? Because in current translations, Elohim, you'll find it in one text, it's translated as God, in another as demon, in another as false gods, another as landlords, another as angels. Well, what if you just take its root meaning and translate it that way every time? The root meaning of Elohim is the powerful ones. And so you read it that way from Genesis 1 verse 1 on, read it as the stories of the powerful ones. The stories change, but not in a random way. Immediately, the stories of the powerful ones line up and run in parallel with stories from the Sumerian cuneiform texts, the more ancient narratives of the Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian, and Assyrian cultures. So once you see that these stories are the same, that we've got a summary version of them in the book of Genesis, that for me was like taking the red pill in the Matrix.
Oh yeah, that's a great
You're in a
comparison.
different world, and you can't go back to reading it the old way. Suddenly you realize in the Bible, you're reading about the sky people of the Sumerian stories, and these are the summary versions of the stories. As soon as you do that, all those moral questions of why would God genocide people? Well, he didn't. That was actually the Elohim doing that. Why is there this to and fro as to how intelligent humans should be in Genesis 3? Because at the beginning of the story, the humans are so unintelligent, they don't even know they're naked. Now we realize one of the Elohim is saying, I want to upgrade them. I want to make them smarter. And another of them is saying, yeah, the snake. And then another one is saying, no, we don't want them too much like us. And so that moral push and pull is because you've got at least two entities or two factions in the story fighting over humanity. It's not that you've got a double-minded God or a God who failed to anticipate. It's the story of the powerful ones and their intersection with our ancient ancestors. And all kinds of problems like that resolve and take on a new character as soon as you do that retranslation.
See, that made so much sense to me. I mean, if you look at God, at the monotheistic paste over of these stories that they did, it makes God look like a schizophrenic, abusive parent. It really does. I mean, look at Abraham trying to sacrifice his son, down to the last minute, and it's like, oh no, don't kill your son. Like just
Jason, that's an awesome example. I want to pause at that because every preacher who's ever tried to preach on Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac has got a huge challenge to get a positive moral out of that story. Because at the moment, if we translate Elohim as God, what we've got is a God who says, I want you to kill your son. And he's doing what sky people, powerful ones, false gods do all through ancient human history. If you can persuade a human being to kill their children, you've got total control over them.
Right. It's pretty sadistic.
Firstborn child, there's nothing you can't get that human being to do. So now we've got God doing the same thing. And then at the end of the story, only joking, actually stop, quick, I'm glad I told you just in time there. It's an awful, horrible story. And the moral appears to be, don't question God, even if he asks you to kill your children.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry. No, I'm not interested in a God whose morals are like that. If a member of my congregation came to me one Sunday morning and said, I nearly killed my son this morning, only changed my mind at the last minute because a little voice said, don't do it, I wouldn't say, wow, you're a man of great faith. I'd be calling child services. I'd be contacting the police. And yet preachers somehow have to gloss over all that moral problem when they come to that text. But you translate Elohim more literally, the story runs differently. The powerful ones tell Abraham to kill his son, and he's so frightened of them, he's about to do it. And then a messenger of another entity called Yahweh says, don't do it. We'll give them something else. Now, Yahweh is appearing as a savior. But when the edit was done, which scholars believe this happened in the 6th century BCE, and there's a very wide consensus about it, that was the moment when the Hebrew scriptures were monotheized. So all the problem of too many gods in the original texts could be gotten rid of. You can get rid of too many gods, but if you've only got one God in that story, he's a monster. And that's the kind of problem it throws up when we don't realize we've got texts about other kinds of beings in there as well.
Do you think, during the time of the Reformation, where they cut a lot of this out of the Bible and all that, were they aware of the Sumerian society and even the origins of where they got their information from?
Knowledge of the Sumerian society really seemed to disappear for quite a long time.
Right.
So certainly when we discovered the cuneiform tablets in the 1500s, so around about the time of the Reformation, we had no idea what was written on them. We didn't know what to expect. We dug up these clay tablets with these little glyphs on them, and a lot of scholars said, oh, that's a lovely pattern they've made, and they had no idea that it was language.
Right.
Because they were from a culture that we thought predated written language. And we had to wait 300 years before we found the translation key to start reading the cuneiform tablets. And that happened in 1835, when Henry Rawlinson of the East India Tea Company discovered the Behistun inscription. And that allowed us to translate the cuneiform tablets. And at that point, we rediscovered all the culture of ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerians, Babylonians, Akkadians, and Assyrians. And it was then, to our surprise, that we started reading stories that sounded a bit familiar.
Right.
It sounded a bit like Adam and Eve, that one, a bit like Cain and Abel, a bit like the flood, a bit like the Tower of Babel. And then we began joining the dots and realizing what we were looking at.
There's also, the Old Testament stories are, very right on similar to the Sumerian cuneiform text. But there's even stories, if I remember right, wasn't there Nimrod? Was that Sumerian? Was very, even that story is very, there's definitely similarities between Jesus and that.
Yes.
As well.
As I did my research for Escaping from Eden, I discovered that there are mythologies and narratives all around the world, from every culture you can imagine, that have echoes of many of these stories. And Nimrod would be one of those.
Yeah. There's Quetzalcoatl, the flying serpent, all these, born of a virgin, right? And even I think did they even share the same star? I don't remember. I know there's so many similarities. I can't remember now.
And in ancient Egyptian narratives as well, many interesting motifs.
Horus. Yeah. And that's something this just fascinates me. I don't know the answer to it. I don't know what that means, and it's boggled my mind. The Old Testament stuff I get, all the Sumerian stories getting fed into the Old Testament, but the New Testament should be 2,000 years ago, right? So why does Jesus' story similar? Is it just a retelling of a story that happened even longer than we knew? Or is this something that repeats, in different areas of the world?
Well, that's possible. Or is it how we tell the story? And that when we tell the story, all kinds of motifs and memory come from our culture to apply to what we're talking about.
Like remaking a bunch of bad superhero movies. They all share the similar motifs as we keep making the same movies. That might be why. Like Jesus has to do this because this is what we're trying to convey. I don't know. It's just something that's boggled my mind about this, all the similarities between them.
It's funny because you mentioned movies, and it struck me again as I was doing all the research of ancient mythologies for my book, Escaping from Eden. I kept coming across things and thinking, wait a minute, I've seen this in a movie, and I've seen the same thing in this other movie and this other movie. And it seems ancient stories keep resurfacing through movie lore. And sometimes it's very conscious, it's very deliberate. It's because these script writers know the ancient stories. Sometimes I think the stories reemerge because we're tapping a memory. We're tapping a collective memory. And so if that happens in our storytelling, I can believe it happened in ancient storytelling too.
Right. It makes that does make sense to me. But for what's crazy about that, like I mentioned Quetzalcoatl, was that Mayan? Right. They had no contact with the European or Middle Eastern world, supposedly. But they have similar stories that reflect it too.
Yeah, that's right. But this question of contact among cultures really is fascinating, because it really gripped me to discover that there were motifs and emblems and stories that would recur from culture to culture, cultures that had no contact. And anyone who starts reading world mythology, that's very often the thing that starts turning our minds to thinking, what's in this? What am I reading? Might this actually be an ancient cultural memory that is being expressed slightly differently from place to place? But then beyond that, you can see artifacts, carvings, emblems that occur from place to place that hint at far more contact than we think there might have been. And then when you go to somewhere like Central America or into Peru, up around the Andes, and start looking at some of the familiar megalithic cultures that were there, it's beginning to emerge that there was a culture prior to all of those that connected all those sites and that operated on a scale far more massive than we've ever imagined. So it's possible that underlying all the traditions we know of is a far earlier culture that was far more connected around the planet than we might have ever thought.
And that gets to the whole ancient technologies and, the idea that we could have had a civilization as technologically advanced or more advanced than we have now, and it all fell apart, which is a scary kind of concept. It's
I think
what
people
face us.
I think that's right. I think that people don't want to believe that a very developed civilization was here before, because they don't want to feel we're that vulnerable. Because if one disappeared, then we could disappear.
Right.
But there's a moment in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's a book in the Bible which has some Sumerian roots to it. And there's a little section right at the beginning there where the writer says, we have no recollection of who went before us. And after a while, nobody will have any recollection of us. And I don't think he's talking about individuals there. I think he's talking about civilizations. And it's a little bit sobering to think that that might be so.
Right. That this you watched they had a History Channel's Life After Humans. You ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
Well, that whenever I'd watch that show, I'd think of this concept of us having an ancient civilization, because in Life After Humans, the whole show they had on History Channel, a couple seasons, it's what happens if humans just suddenly disappeared off the face of the earth.
Actually, no, I saw the first
Right.
episode. Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, how much would just disappear? Just literally, it boggles. We could have had a whole civilization. You watch that show, and you realize what these guys are saying is that we could have had a whole civilization before, and it'd all be just gone. Very few things left.
Well, take Amazonia. When the Spanish arrived in Amazonia, it was coast to coast cities. Well, it isn't today, and only now have we got technology that can do what's the technology? It reads the magnetization and conductivity of soil, and now we can view land from overhead, and we can see the signs of massive cities in the Amazonian jungle. I said the Spanish, it's the Portuguese in Amazonia, if I'm remembering right. And now we can see what they described. And similar in Cambodia, we're able to get imaging of huge cities. And the cities that were in Amazonia were on the scale of European cities of the same time. And yet they've all vanished under the jungle. And again, that's really sobering. But even more sobering than that, as I drilled down into the Genesis texts, I started coming across parallels with other mythologies that suggest that there has been a resetting of human civilization on Earth on a planetary scale a number of times. And even a casual read through Genesis, you'll come across 3 resets that are quite obvious, and I believe there are even more. And if you read the Vedas, the ancient Indian narratives, I think their account is that we're on the 5th reset. So that's not just cities disappearing in South America, that's the whole planet experiencing a cataclysm so immense that human society has to reestablish itself.
Well, the Vedas, I mean, they seem to have no problem talking about other gods and fighting in the air and having ships. I mean, it's pretty evident, in my opinion, that they're talking about aliens. I don't see any other way to read it when you get into the Vedas.
Yes, I think you can certainly read it that way. At the very least, you can read it as civilizations that had spacefaring and flying technology. And you read those stories and you can't say, oh, this is some kind of a moral tale. No, you really can't read them that way. This is a metaphor. Well, a metaphor for what? It's very straightforward. They read as chronicles. They read as histories. They just happen to have anomalous technology in them.
They're like superhero movies. Those two, like the way that they are, or like a Star Wars movie. I mean, they really they have technology. Their weapons are all very, echoing something that's future technology that we know of today.
And they've got very nitty-gritty detail of some of that tech as well. What it sounded like, how fast it moved, what the fuel was. What's that a metaphor for?
Right. I mean, the Bible seems very metaphor all through it, but was it them pasting things over to make it a moral story? I mean, what's your thoughts or go ahead. Sorry.
Well, there are moments that I think we might read with religious lenses on, and then we miss the blindingly obvious. And I think one of the great examples of that would be Ezekiel's abduction experience, where he gets taken up in a craft, and he describes the craft. He's describing the technology in detail, and he talks about where they were.
That's
whenever it flew, and the being in the craft who's piloting it, he describes as, well, he was like a human being, one like a son of man.
Yeah.
But not. And all the time that the like a human being is trying to have a conversation with Ezekiel about religion and politics, Ezekiel is completely distracted. He's looking around he's never seen glass like it, this canopy, and then the noise, and then how the wheels work. And he describes the thing as Yahweh's habitation, or as the glory. But it was such an overwhelming experience, he said, that when they finally landed in Tel Aviv, he couldn't speak for 7 days. He was overwhelmed. So if you read that without a religious lens on, you think, but I know exactly what he's describing. This is a craft that he's being taken around in, and this is not a human being who's flying it. And then there are other moments where I think it's when Elijah is taken up at the end of his ministry, and we've got a description of a craft arriving that's belching smoke and fire.
Right.
And as Eric von Daniken asked, does Almighty God actually need a vehicle like that to travel around in? Wouldn't he have something that was better tuned if he did? But he wouldn't need a vehicle. And then they disappear through what to a modern eye looks and sounds every bit like a wormhole. It's described in the language of the day, but even through all that, it's not difficult for us to find moments that it's not a metaphor. It's describing something that was seen. And maybe the writer didn't even understand what they'd seen, so they're just going to tell it how they saw it, and then they leave it to us to work it out.
Right. I mean, he's describing, we're describing something, that's beyond us even now, technology-wise. I mean, for them, they just got the wheel, I'm saying, that they got fire, they got some technology, but nothing like that. I mean, what is he going to use to describe any of it but a wheel? I mean, he doesn't have many things to go by language wise to describe it. And then it's how many times it's been translated and rewritten a little here and there. And here we go. This is what we got. It still sounds like an abduction experience.
It does.
I don't look through it through a religious lens because I've never been Christian. I've always had this feeling deep down that all these stories were something else, that they are our encounters with something that influenced humanity. And me and my wife describe it as we go to the Church of Ancient Aliens. When people, we joke about that with our kids. There you go, because they go to Sunday school, and me and my wife are like, yeah, we go to the Church of Ancient Aliens, but you go to Sunday school. Don't make grandma mad.
Well, somehow it all goes together.
It does. One of the things that there's so many examples. When when the Hebrews were exiled, and they had the pillar in the sky dropping manna, and even a manna machine, to give them food. Couldn't God just snap his fingers, give them food right there? He's got a pillar over them, just dropping food from the sky. Doesn't he have a more efficient way of doing that? But that to me sounds like a UFO. One of the only UFOs I really ever saw wasn't a circular craft or a disc. It was a pillar. It was huge. So that's one of my favorite examples of what I think is a description of an alien craft.
Again, they're describing what they saw: a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke. And then a really intriguing moment getting into the New Testament of a light that could guide people from one country to a specific building.
Oh, right.
Well, what's that? It's not a star.
Right. Just as a kid, I was like, okay, how did they follow a star to one little tiny house? How did that star lead them there? They just keep looking up at the star. I mean, it never made sense to me. But they teach you this in Bible school. They teach you. What I wonder is that how long people have been telling these stories for hundreds of years. Preachers have been preaching this stuff for hundreds of years, and it's just been, they were able, there's got to be, people have intelligent minds. People have to question these things. I mean, even our founding fathers believed in the plurality of worlds concept. They believed that there could be alien life, so people had to question this stuff, but man, the church just stomped down any dissent on that.
Absolutely. Now, fair, I think in today's times, good preachers, when they come across those moments, will share the questions. We'll be able to say, what is that? I actually don't know what that is. But yes, in times past, the church is very clear what answers would or would not be accepted to those questions. So in 1600, Giordano Bruno was suggesting there may be intelligent life on other planets. And as a thanks for that thought, he got dragged through the streets and burned alive at an auto da fe to tell all the people, these are things we don't think.
Hearsay.
These are questions we don't ask.
Hearsay.
It was heresy, that's right.
Heresy.
And it had been, if not a heresy, it had been a taboo since about 144 AD. But what I discovered in my research for Escaping from Eden is that before then, the idea of us living in a populated universe, the idea of us being part of an ET family, the idea that other entities may have intervened in human evolution, all those ideas were part of mainstream conversation in the church. And there were significant church fathers. I'm thinking of people like Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Marcion, who was later deemed a heretic. They all affirmed Plato's explanation of origins and human origins, and his explanations contained all those ideas within it.
Right. The church knew. That's what I've always thought.
Yeah, it was part of the conversation until about 144 AD, when some decisions were taken, some votes went the wrong way, and when they excommunicated Marcion, I think that was a key moment in saying, no, we are going to accept the current version of the Hebrew Scriptures. We're going to glue them on to the Apostles' teaching to make a Bible. And what that meant was they were gluing on a worldview that says there's God, the devil, human beings, animals, animal, vegetable, mineral, nothing else.
And heaven and hell.
And heaven and hell, that's right. And it was, I think it was an agenda that was helpful to imperial religion, and the previous narratives were less helpful. I think that was part of why that line was taken and why it was suppressed so fiercely, because we don't have anything left of what Marcion wrote, and he was the most pro-Plato of all those guys. He had a massive following among churches across a big region, and yet we can't find a single thing he wrote, only the attacks on what he wrote by the mainstream.
That's so sad because he and he probably had tons of followers and they were scared of him because he was making a lot more sense than they were.
Yeah, he did. And what people forget is that the mainstream who won the debates, some of those significant leaders agreed 90% with what Marcion was saying. And what he was saying was that the Elohim stories should not be regarded as God's stories. If we believe Jesus is showing us what God is like, that tells us straight away that those early stories are about some other kind of entity. And he was leaning towards Plato's explanation that the other kind of entity they weren't divine beings. They were just another more powerful, more advanced species who came and interfered or intervened in our development.
Why do you think they were so bent on making sure they all were considered one God in the whole story? Besides making it monotheistic, I mean, they could have just gone with him and said, there is one God, but all this other stuff from the past isn't God, not of the New Testament, not the God of Jesus. Why do you think they were so insistent on that?
Well, I think for a start, that view was formed in stages. So if you look at the development of the Bible, the earliest texts are what I call the Abrahamic texts, Genesis 1 to 11, the stories of beginnings. And I believe that Abraham and Sarah, the progenitors of the Jewish tradition, brought those stories with them from Ur of the Chaldees, and they are the summary form of the Sumerian narratives. Then at a later stage, they're added to some other books to create the Pentateuch, the Torah. Then at a later stage, added to some more books. That becomes the Deuteronomistic history. At a later stage, some more books. That becomes the Hebrew canon. And by the time you're at the final version, 6th century BCE, you've turned it all into a monotheistic text. But the previous edit, I believe, had those books as a henotheistic library. And what henotheism says is there are many gods, but you should worship this one. So there are many Elohim, just worship Yahweh. And so there's an evolution from all kinds of entities and then all kinds of gods, but worship this one. And then by the time you're in the 6th century BCE, there's only one God, and forget about any other kind of entity. So by the time Christianity is happening, you've had sort of 6 centuries to bed down this monotheistic message that we're alone in the universe. And so I don't think it was necessarily that the church suddenly got a bee in its bonnet about other kinds of entities. The whole of society had shifted away from those old stories, and yet they were never quite forgotten, and certainly not forgotten in other narratives around the world.
The church was battling against competing religions, pagan religions that had multiple gods. A lot of the other religions had multiple gods. So I guess in a way to separate themselves out in a way was to have a monotheistic concept that'd be different from the rest.
I think so. And there was an emperor a little later along. I'm trying to remember his name. And he produced a law, this would have been in about 381 AD, that it essentially illegalized non-Christian religions within the empire. So old priesthoods had to be disbanded, old texts had to be destroyed or archived. And so there was a moment when all other explanations of the world there's a real effort right from the top down to get rid of them. And I think that by that point, Christianity, it had become the imperial department of religion. And the idea of being a good citizen had been very fused with the idea of what being a Christian was. Obey God, obey the emperor.
Because he's divine. He has divine power. They have to link that in some way. And I always find it, Rome being kind of the center, with the Catholic Church of all this, is how much Rome spent with emperors like Nero and that spent time trying to destroy Christianity in its early days to eventually become the number one promoter of Christianity.
Yes, that's right. I think they tried to destroy primitive Christianity, and then they decided rather than destroy it, let's reinvent it. Let's hijack
hey, this could work good. Right. Hijack it.
Let's, and I think that to put it very simply, that's kind of what happened. And it was once Christianity was adopted by the empire, that's when suddenly they start building big church buildings. That's when bishops start living in palaces and wearing purple, which is the top rank in the social structure of the Roman Empire. And all of a sudden, you've turned Christianity into a religion of worship and obedience. And it produces a passive people who are very easily managed. They could be manipulated with all these threats of being out of the church or threats of hellfire, all that kind of thing. And it is, I believe, a total distortion from what was intended in the beginning. I do not believe the Gospels teach a religion of worship and obedience. In fact, Jesus said, I did not come to be served. Right. And that word serve is a worship word. So what happens if we just sit with that, Jesus saying, I did not come to be worshipped, and then look at what emerged? You realize something very funny has happened. And what happened was the Roman Empire and its distortion of that early faith.
What do you think? I mean, besides the fact that I've felt this, I've never being agnostic and questioning what religions are. I've been fascinated by religions and Christianity especially, and I've had plenty of Christian friends, and I respect their faith. And I tell them, there's a part of me that I do believe that Jesus Christ was real. I'm still torn up on the whole Son of God and all the meaning, because to me, I just feel like there's no way we can know any of those things. I think there's a lot of wisdom to be found in the New Testament from Jesus, but I'm not going to bend down and say you can only get to heaven if you believe in Jesus. Something that's never sat right with me, and I just don't ever see how it can.
And when you see the dependence of texts that we think of as religious texts on, say, the Sumerian writings, what's so interesting about that is the Sumerian texts are not religious texts.
Right.
Firstly, they're not about God. They're not the sacred texts of any religion in the world. And then you can go to many, many other narratives around the world that speak about similar things, about the emergence of human beings, about our intersection with ET species. And those texts aren't religious texts either. Sometimes they're curated by religious priesthoods, but they are not there to legitimize a religious institution. And so the Popol Vuh, for instance, with the Mayan narratives, would be an example of that. Many of the narratives of Native American peoples, another example. The narratives of Indigenous Australians, another example. And one of the things I hope people really get from Escaping from Eden is that these ancient stories should not be considered as the property of religious people or religious communities. Right. These are the property of the world, telling us about our ancestry and our prehistory, and anyone can come to them and just have their worldview blown open by the cultural memory that has been carried by these texts.
Well, I always thought about it too, and I've had one of my favorite guesses I had on. I'm gonna have her on again. It's written a book about the Anunnaki. I can never say it right. Anunnaki. See, I'm the butcher of names. She's got a new book coming out too on that subject, and the Stitchin, his research. One of the things we agreed on on all this is that they keep people in the past really just told you as it was, that what they saw. They didn't have, their minds did not work the same way our minds do now. They weren't as metaphorical as we think they were. And they really just told us exactly what they saw. They didn't have the same kind of thought that we do, the inner voice in a way.
Yes,
that we have.
That's right. I think that's exactly right.
So when we get these texts that they've made into metaphors and symbolism and all that stuff, I really think it's just trying to tell us exactly in the best words in the language that they had what they saw. I'm a big Trekkie, besides Star Wars, I'm a big Trekkie. And what Next Generation had, the original series did too, but Next Generation really had a good episode, and I can't remember the name. I'm not that big of a Trekkie. But where Picard, they have, they would monitor a civilization that's not ready for first contact. and Picard gets like, somebody ends up getting slipped up, and Picard has to beam down and ends up getting, caught by one of these people, and they're like, he's a god, that's one of my favorite episodes, because to me, when I saw that as a kid, I'm like, that's it. That's exactly what happened in our past right there. What, some bald guy came down and, beamed down, and we're like, he's a god. That's how, people, no matter, he's trying to tell him, I am not a god. I'm not a god. And they don't believe him. They shoot him in the chest with an arrow in the episode because they still don't believe him. I'm like, that's exactly it. That's exactly what happened in our past.
Yeah, I can believe that. And when you read the ancient mythologies, it seems that some of the entities that bumped up against our ancestors were following what Star Trek calls the Prime Directive.
Right.
And others are not.
Right.
And so this body gets set up, if you read the Hebrew scriptures, called the Sky Council, which appears to have various kinds of entities and beings on it. And it's a committee. Basically, they've come to some kind of a truce as to how they're going to be stakeholders in planet Earth and the story of humanity. But some are clearly wanting more intervention than others. Some want the humans smarter than others. Some believe in the Prime Directive. Some couldn't care less. And all that conflict is built into the stories of the Sky Council in the Bible, as well as in texts all around the world. And even today, when people stop and think about the policy of secrecy and debunking around UFOs, close encounters, that has been in place since 1947, when you ask the question, why is there that secrecy? Why can't they tell us they're engaging with these things? Why can't they tell us if there's contact? I think one of the possibilities is that what's described in those ancient texts, this secret committee, the Sky Council, maybe not much has changed since that time.
Right. Well, if we have contact, the contact is, okay, we are real, we are here, and shut your mouth about it. Don't tell your people about it.
Yes.
Is one of the kind of feelings that you get from it.
It might be our government saying we won't tell our people about it.
Well, if you're not the top echelon, if the government, if there's something above the government, the aliens, or there's a council overseeing us, or a federation, then our government's not the top dog anymore, or
That's
any of
very
the other
true.
governments in the world.
And one of the reasons I mentioned that is that people who follow this topic will have noticed a very significant shift in policy last year, when all of a sudden the US Navy starts saying, we have been engaging with UAPs, or what we used to call UFOs, and we don't know what they are. That was the policy prior to the National Security Act of 1947, which Truman signed, which classified all UFO research. Prior to 1947, the Air Force, the Navy was saying exactly those things. We're trying to find out what the flying saucers are.
Right.
We've been chasing them. We've been engaging with them. We'll tell you when we find out what they are, but we certainly don't think they're from here. And then silence and debunking for 70 plus years.
That's what Project Blue Book was.
Exactly.
I mean, it was just, when 1952, oh yeah. Well, in 1952, we had them hovering over Washington, D.C., and they had to have a press conference and talk. Imagine if that happened now. Imagine if there was UFOs like they were spotted in 1952 with all the cameras we had and all that stuff. Man, imagine that press conference now. Back then, reporters are just asking, simple little questions, and the military can give whatever explanation you want. If that happened now, we could get a UFO sighting like that over the White House where thousands of people see, and then have the military address that. I would love to see. And that's what I'm wondering is going to happen. That they know that's going to happen. And that's why we're getting this small disclosure at a time. They're prepping for something.
I think so. I think we are in a period of soft disclosure because they are preparing for something that can't be explained away, or they're preparing for a disclosure being made by another authority, which we nearly had in, I think it was 2008, or was it? No, let me remember this right. 2012, I think it was, when Prime Minister Medvedev, the Russian Prime Minister, talked about the book that the Prime Minister gets given detailing the other species that we are in contact with. And it was recorded, people can watch it on YouTube. And when that happened, Putin didn't go on TV and say the Prime Minister was incapacitated, he was only joking, he was having a laugh, don't take any note. He wasn't debunked by the authorities in any way. And you can watch it for yourself and ask yourself, was that a joke? And no, I don't think it
he
was
looks straight serious. It doesn't look like a joke at all to me. I mean, I don't maybe know Russian, how Russians behave differently than Americans, but he looked pretty serious. And I mean, these guys just don't say this stuff. They don't joke around, especially in Russia.
No.
I mean,
no, they don't.
I mean, their disclosure or their cover up movement back then, they made people disappear during the Soviet Union for talking about it.
If you've got that happening there, then you can well understand other national authorities thinking we need to be prepared for this going viral, for this coming out. And so hence soft disclosure. And hence in 2009, Jason, do you remember something called the Pontifical Academy of Sciences convening in 2009?
With basically that's where they conveyed that we accept the idea of alien life, basically, that they're our space brothers.
Yeah,
basically.
Right.
It was Pope Benedict. Was that Pope Benedict?
Benedict the 16th. Yes. That's right.
Yes.
The most conservative Pope in my lifetime. I'm so glad you remember, Jason, because, I ask a lot of people, do you remember that? And they say, no, I don't have any recollection of that, which horrifies me because it was mind-boggling.
It's really important. I thought it was important back then. We got to go to commercial. We got to go to our commercial break here, and we're going to open that up a bit more because that, to me, it's exactly what I thought. I'm like, why aren't more people going, what the heck? What's going on? About that. I'm glad you brought that up. We'll get to that when we come back from commercial break, and we will open up the phone lines, guys. You can call in if you have a question for Paul Wallace tonight. Please call in. The phone lines, all of them will be open for you. All right, we'll be right back after this short commercial break.
When Alex Gardner is asleep, he has an extraordinary gift. The government wants it, the scientists want it, but to keep it may cost him his life. It might be better if Alex didn't sleep at all, but he cannot resist entering the dreamscape. Can you? See Dreamscape in the West End and all over London now. Certificate 15. It takes an extraordinary adventurer to enter the dreamscape.
Do you wish for more paranormal and spiritual content? The Paranormal Chronicles magazine is a free digital magazine crammed with the very best in paranormal and spiritual articles and features. No sign-up, no subscription, just free reading and knowledge for you. Read today at www.paranormalchronicles.com/magazine.
This is an Apex Studio presentation.
Hi, I'm Barry, owner-operator of Barry's Barometer Barn. Lately, I bet you've been lying awake at night asking yourself, how many barometers do I really need? Well, at Barry's Barometer Barn, we think you need more than one. Otherwise, we're going to go out of business. Remember, at Barry's Barometer Barn, we don't know the meaning of high-pressure sales. Come on, folks, buy another barometer. I'm trying to put my kids through college. I've got a family to support and a secret mistress who isn't cheap.
Visit Barry's Barometer Barn, 000 Storm Drive. Come on, folks, buy a barometer. I'm Barry's older brother, Larry, and every time one of you people walk past the store without coming in, Barry beats me.
This has been a presentation from Tim Morgan's APAC Studio. For more almost professional amateur comic studio content, visit the APAC YouTube channel. Search APAC 2002. That's APAC 2002 on YouTube.
Paranation Magazine is a new paranormal magazine based out of Denver, Colorado. Our goal isn't just to give you the best paranormal content out there, but to promote paranormal unity. We're doing this by giving everyone an opportunity to tell their stories and to share their experiences. For more information, follow us on Facebook at Paranation Magazine and soon, paranationmag.com.
For every Earthling who's ever dreamed of adventures beyond the stars comes the astonishing story of one who made it, Alex Rogan.
You have been recruited by the Star League to defend the frontier against Zur and the Kodan Armada.
Of all the life forms in all the galaxies, one has been chosen to be the last starfighter. The Last Starfighter, with the film of the #1 hit Do They Know It's Christmas, the official Band-Aid story. In the West End and across London now, rated PG.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to the Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do Voices from Beyond, the Cold Case Files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
The answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is 42. 42? Yes, I thought it over quite thoroughly. It is, it's 42. It would have been simpler, of course, to have known what the actual question was.
But it was the question. The ultimate question. Of everything.
That's not a question. Only when you know the question will you know what the answer means.
Tonight on Paranormal Soup, our guest is Paul Wallace, author of Escaping from Eden. This book is coming out April 24th. I cannot wait to read this book. And like I said, you can pre-order it now, so go check it out. But we're talking about the concept of ancient aliens in the Bible. It's something I've been fascinated with since the first time, like I said, I was in 6th grade. I found my mom's copy of Eric Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. It just, my mind explained so much to me and brought up so many more questions about what what our past is. Have we had multiple civilizations before with technology? We haven't even touched upon like ideas of Atlantis and other past civilizations. So much to talk about, but you can join the conversation tonight. We have our phone lines all open. You can call in at 219-230-4444. That's 219-230-4444. Or the other phone line is 260-225-9419. That's 260-225-9419. And then the Skype IDs, if you want to call in, is OOJBland, OO, or Skype ID JBland Paranormal Soup. Those are the ways to call in. If you call in, you hear us talking, just wait till we call on you to join the conversation. If I hang up on you, it's because I got somebody else waiting on the line, so don't take offense. Just try calling back later. But let's go ahead and get back to our guest. Thank you, Paul, for hanging with us still. I want to get back to what we left off on about what was it, 2009? You're saying under Pope Benedict they had this. What was the name of the council?
It was the Pontifical Academy for Sciences, and Pope Benedict XVI called on them to convene a 5-day colloquium. So this was a symposium of top scholars, top theologians. And we were told there was a big build up to it. So for about a year leading up to it, we were told what they were going to be discussing, even though it was 5 closed sessions, 5 days of closed sessions. We knew that they were talking about, quote, the theological implications of contact with other civilizations, end quote. Well, my jaw dropped when I first heard about this, because it was only 400 years ago that the church was burning people at the stake for suggesting that there were people living on other planets. And all of a sudden, we're having a discussion about this, are we? And so Father Jose Gabriel Funes, director of the Vatican Observatory, I think was one of the first who started going to the press and saying, oh, this thing's coming up, you might be interested. And even then, he was saying to the press, we people need to be ready sooner than anyone anticipates to embrace a brother or sister alien. And when he kept saying sooner than anyone anticipates, I thought, what? Sooner? What do they know? Because it really gave the impression that they were wanting to get in ahead of disclosure being made by another authority. It looked like they wanted to get in first so that they could say, remember, don't worry, we talked about this. There's no issue. We got this covered. And then the colloquium happened, and then some other spokespeople came out, and they are all very, very senior. So you know they're speaking on behalf of the Curia. They're speaking on behalf of Pope Benedict. So we had Monsignor Corrado Balducci come out and say, when people report close encounters, he said they're not describing a demonic phenomenon. It's not a psychological episode that they're reporting. They have experienced a totally different kind of entity.
Wow.
One that merits serious study.
That one I haven't heard.
So when he said that, that's pretty well word for word what he said.
Wow.
Right away he's saying there is another kind of entity, not a demon.
And he's admitting to alien abduction, the belief in alien abduction, that it's real and happening.
Close encounters was what he was affirming. And he said we need to study it seriously. So when somebody of his eminence says that on behalf of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, that is an affirmation of other kinds of beings. It's an affirmation of ETs. And then we had Reverend Dr. Guy Consolmagno go to the press and say, we shouldn't really even use the language of alien for other species, other civilizations, because there'd be creatures of the same creator, there'd be children of the same heavenly father, and we shouldn't be surprised to find them because they're in the Bible, he said. They're in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And it was when I heard Guy Consolmagno say that I thought, oh my goodness, a gauntlet has been thrown down here. Because how could I or anyone have missed that? If there are aliens in the Bible, how could I not see that? I've been a believer for, I don't know how many years by then. I'd been lecturing in hermeneutics, how to interpret the Bible, for 15 years. How could I have missed if there are aliens in the Bible? And so I took that as a challenge. So when the time finally came around, nearly a decade later, that I was enjoying this period of quiet where I could do some study, I thought, I'm going to respond to that challenge. I'm going to go back to the beginning, back to Genesis, back to Eden. I'm going to read it again and find out what I've missed. And when I went back, did the work we mentioned earlier, all around this word Elohim, I realized that contact with another species begins in the first 2 verses of the Bible, and it doesn't disappear until the end of Revelation.
Boy, that's a whole ball of wax to open up too when you get into Revelation too.
Yes, we won't do that.
Right. Well, you know, what I find so amazing is that the media, it seems like that whole 2009 kind of reveal by the Catholic Church, it was barely covered by the media. It was just like a footnote. Like, we have to just put this on paper. Don't pay too much of attention to this. We just want to put this on paper so we're ready. So we have this ready to go when the time comes.
I really think that was a choice made by the media. I think the Vatican were making as much noise as they could, really.
Well, you know what? That's a great point. Yeah, it does seem like they were trying to get some attention about it. But why did the media ignore it? You know,
maybe
you think it should be a story.
Well, maybe, yes, but maybe the media weren't expecting another disclosure and so didn't see the need to get in with it.
Even if they don't, it's a story that the Catholic Church is coming out, and it should be saying, "Our bad for all the burning people at the stake for this," but we might have. You know, there should be a "my bad" statement in there, but
you would think so, yes.
But heck, they were burning people at the stake for believing the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. So
yes, that's true.
You know, there's been a lot of "my bads." You know, but that's people. I don't blame God for that. You know, people screw stuff up all the time, and definitely think we've really screwed the pooch on this in pretty much for the Christian side of religion. I find interesting is when you go to, and it's not a knock on Christianity, but it just seems like it's had a lot more manipulation over the years compared to when you get to study Native American religions. I mean, they, to me, outline exactly a UFO experience, and they don't seem to deny that they're star people. Many of the Native American cultures accept this.
I think that's right. I think the distinction is probably, and again, it's not to bash Christianity or any particular religion, but I think the way it's unfolded through history is that religions that have become tied up with the power of the state have become part of the means of control, and they've become part of the "we are alone in the universe" narrative. If you go to narratives that are very, very open in their accounts of our contact with other species, almost invariably you're looking at narratives that don't belong to state religions. They're indigenous narratives, they're indigenous mythologies, like the Native American narratives, like the indigenous Australian ones, like the Mayan stories of the Popol Vuh. Those aren't the texts of the state church. They won't be read from at state occasions as the voice of authority. They are a memory that's carried by the cultures of the world, by our indigenous peoples.
Well, see, you're from you're born and raised in Australia. I don't know if you have any Aboriginal ancestry. I'm American and I'm Cherokee, and Cherokee completely believed in extraterrestrials. They had like egg-shaped spaceships that landed and literally people stepped out. I mean, that's their description. It handed down generations. To me, it's an eyewitness account.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, Jason, because I had an amazing experience speaking at the UFO Research Network for New South Wales a few months ago. And I went and visited it, and I was really taken by surprise by the guy who was running the meeting, a wonderful guy called Jamie Leonardo. And he said, I might get you to introduce yourself in the second half of the meeting, he said. And about 10 minutes later, he said, would you like to come up and introduce yourself, say something about your book? So I went up and just said something very, very briefly about escaping from Eden. And when we got to the break, there was a whole queue of people lining up to talk to me, and many of them sharing their own stories, a number of them saying, I'm actually a Christian believer and I've had this experience. I'm not allowed to mention it at church. And then one guy came and told me his story. His story was that at the age of 20, he had been living on a property in Queensland, and he had seen what he thought were the lights of an aircraft flying over their enormous farm. And he thought, whoa, that's low. That looks like it's wanting to land. I better go out and show it where the flat land is, where it's going to be safe to land. So he went out to wave it in the right direction. And as it got closer, he realized it was the lights of a saucer-shaped craft. It was a UFO. And then his whole family came out and had the experience.
So multiple witnesses.
Multiple witnesses. Now, these craft visited that property over the next 20 years. Every few months, a group of them would turn up and gather somewhere on their property. Nobody seemed to get out of the craft. The craft would just remain in this one place, and then they'd take off again. And he said that when he had the first encounter, when he realized what he was looking at, he tried to communicate with it mentally. And the message he sent up was, please don't be afraid. We won't hurt you. And I said, why on earth did you say that?
Right.
Couldn't it have been them saying that to you?
They're the ones with the ship hovering above you with the future alien technology. Go see some sci-fi movies. You might rethink that thought you just gave them.
Exactly. He told me that because I'd said, was there something about your farm or something about your family that made these craft feel they could come? And he said, well, that was the message that I sent when I saw the first one. And I said, well, why did you say that? Why didn't you say, please don't hurt us? And he said, because my family are Cherokee people.
Oh.
And we've always known that we're not alone.
We're star
in the
people.
universe. And yes, we have known that our contact at the beginning of our story was a one of benign contact, where these people came from another place in these egg-shaped craft, landed, came out, and then helped us to establish ourselves as a people. And that's why I wasn't afraid. And I loved hearing that story, and I felt very privileged to be told that story, because very often in our culture, when we talk about ETs or aliens, we've got this Mars attacks, invasion of the body snatchers, Independence Day vision that immediately comes to mind. And certainly there are some negative and dark agendas that you can find all around the world regarding some of the ET presence that might be bumping up against humanity. But there's another layer to the story too, and it's of this benign, helping, nurturing. And I believe right at the beginning of Genesis, we've got an account of beings arriving from somewhere else to help us recover from a planetary cataclysm. And that is the first encounter of this civilization with extraterrestrial species.
So that's a scary thought to me. You know, when I first, this last year, we started covering it in our news segment, the whole disclosure movement. I'm like, uh-oh. We almost don't want our government to come out and just start opening up, because that means something's going to happen, in my opinion. It might not be good. It might be positive. It might not be good either. And you mentioned them coming at a cataclysmic event, you know, and if we've had 5 resets, what, you know, previous cataclysm events, they've shown up and had this contact with humans and then go quiet again. That's what it is. Do you think that's kind of the cycle? They come at a time of a reset, help us out, and then they go away and let us rebuild again?
I do. And then I also think that there may be a presence here trying to avoid us creating our own cataclysm. And there are many sources you can go to.
Oh, yeah.
That might be the case.
Well, you talk about how many UFOs showed up after, you know, 1947. Okay, we bombed Hiroshima with a nuclear weapon. Where does the UFO crash? Right near our only Air Force battalion that's carrying a nuke, you know, or hydrogen bomb, I should say.
Well,
they land near that.
Exactly. That was the story of The Day the Earth Stood Still, if you've seen that
Right.
movie.
Oh, yes.
When that movie came out, it's very, very interesting. In the movie, there's this giant android robot that turns up and terrifies everybody and finally brings out this message, don't destroy yourselves. And the idea was that they had seen the signatures of nuclear explosions and so had come to try and warn us. In Star Trek, knowing that you're a fan, of course, they converted that into a storyline that says the aliens turned up when they saw the warp signature.
Right.
The first warp ship. That's their version of what I think happened in history, which is that we exploded some H-bombs and then all of a sudden we've got a flurry of craft from somewhere else coming to work out what's going on and maybe to have some communication. Another example would be Chernobyl, where mainstream press reported the presence of an enormous UFO over Chernobyl at the time of the meltdown. And what went into the local paper was the suggestion that there was some kind of protection or restraint that was visited upon Chernobyl to make sure that disaster wasn't far worse than it actually was.
Because it should have been.
Exactly.
Because it should have been. And that's what that's what they don't talk about, is that it should have been way worse than it was. And that's an interesting point. Did aliens interfere at that time to keep it from becoming a much worse disaster? I mean, we'll look what we got in Japan with the radioactive material getting put out in the ocean. You wonder if there's any UFO activity that's related to that, or what's been happening since
frankly, I hope
that
so,
disaster.
because I don't think we're doing too well managing.
Right. Right. So it makes you wonder. I mean, think about all the instances of, there we had in the in America. I don't remember the dates, the total story, but I know this is a very iconic UFO incident where they show up at a military base and shut off our nukes. They switch them off. And then in Russia, they had a similar experience where they turned them on. They armed them. And UFOs were seen while this is going on. And they've had people in the military have come out to speak out about this, and not just one instance, numerous instances. And it's like, what's the communication there? It seems pretty obvious. Something's trying to tell us, yeah, you guys have messed up.
You've got some dangerous stuff here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But do you think, if we ended up going to nuclear war, they would stop it?
If there's a presence here that can prevent Chernobyl doing something far worse, if we've got a presence here that can disarm 12 nuclear warheads, then that gives me some hope that they could actually prevent us blowing each other
would
up.
They? Would they? That's the. I mean, I think they could, but would they? Is there a prime directive that says no? I mean, that's been played out in Star Trek quite a bit.
Well, I think my impression is that the prime directive has been broken.
Is there a Kirk out there ready to break that prime directive to save our butts?
I think so. There have been interventions. We have the memory of interventions in world mythologies, and we have contemporary press reports of interventions with regard to Chernobyl and such. So I think that at least some of the presences are willing not to observe something called the prime directive. They might not believe in it at all. Well,
going back to, the different intentions of aliens and that one, I mean, we've had alien abductees on here. A friend of mine, Terry Lovelace, has been a guest on the show multiple times. His experiences are not positive and physically harmful to him. I've seen the bruises, the marks. It's not a pleasant experience. Like the guy was saying, to the UFO, we won't hurt you. You better be worried about them hurting you, because there are people that do experience. So there is some kind of negative aspect. And I think what you've talked about within the Bible, you see evidence of that. I mean, the sadistic, trying to convince a guy to kill his own child is not a good thing. That there's another side, another force, that has not great motives or intentions or respect for humanity.
That's correct. And that continues all through much of the Hebrew scriptures. I mean, you've got just in those stories of beginning, some very cold acts, the genocide of Genesis 6, for instance. In Genesis 11, we've got a technological species that gets bombed back into a condition where we're now pre-language, pre-speech. Well, that is, I can't imagine a crueler act upon a species than that. And then you go further and you've got what looks like colonies of human beings being governed by these powerful ones, these Elohim, who then send the human beings to war against each other because the Elohim are in competition for resources of some kind. And so there's a very cold relationship with humanity that comes across. Sometimes you get the impression that the powerful ones regard us rather like we regard cattle.
Yes.
And at times they're just very, very indifferent as to whether they are hurting us or hurting our entire species. There's a very unusual phenomenon. I don't know if you covered this, Jason, on your show, but to do with people who go missing in America's national parks.
Oh, David Pilates. I want him as a guest. Yeah. I have him as a friend on Facebook, and I'm like trying to get up the courage to ask him. But yes, I'm so fascinated by that.
Because one of the intriguing things about those cases, first of all, just in case anyone's not familiar, we're not talking about people wandering off the path and getting lost.
Right.
You're talking about a group of people playing baseball and all of a sudden one of them vanishes, that kind of disappearance. And then when the people reappear, they're in a completely different place, usually naked, with their clothes folded next to them, and very often inside out, as if someone's a little bit unfamiliar with how to fold human clothing. No evident cause of death, and no apparent concern that the person has been returned dead. I mean, you just read a few of those cases and your mind boggles as to what kind of entity would be so careful with folding clothes and returning the person looking pristine, but not too worried that they're no longer alive.
It's like, oh, sorry, our bad. We'll just leave that here for you.
Whoops.
Yeah,
whoops.
You might want to come and collect it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what it feels like when you find it. But they've had even more. I mean, there's been people they've found that have been cored out, just like the cattle mutilations.
Yes, that's right.
That's a scary thought.
Like that, and again, that suggests to me a plurality of beings present on Earth or around us. Some concerned for us, and some couldn't care less about us.
Or
but with
even
my
worse.
Cherokee friend. I do think he read that right. They didn't get hurt in 20 years of visitations, so I take that as evidence he'd got the right kind.
And obviously they helped the Cherokee people, you know.
That's the story.
And just, you know, the same, you know, I mean, Cherokees went on to do horrible things just like the rest of Christianity did. They had slaves and, you know, they had good aspects and bad aspects. That's just humans. We got good humans, we got bad humans, you know, so they weren't perfect either. You know, that's what I'm saying with Christianity. It's not a knock on Christianity. It's just humans wanting to use something to control other humans, you know. Right. So it's not Christianity's fault. It's just an aspect of humanity, how we screw things up. We do got somebody on the phone line. It always has really great questions. Is Zach. How you doing tonight, Zach?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for calling in.
Okay, so I just have two questions today. Hey, Paul. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Zach.
My first question relates to the Tower of Babel over in Genesis, where, you know, humans were building this large structure to try after God. God struck them by giving everybody different languages, you know, which, according to the Bible, explains why everybody on planet Earth has some kind of a different language that we all speak. And then also there's the theory of plate tectonics, which explain that large land masses over time would shift, pull apart, become the continents that we know of today. I've tried to look at the Bible myself, and I couldn't find anything really that would really correlate the theory of plate tectonics, though, with what's being explained in the Bible. Have you found anything in your research that does explain that?
I found something really intriguing. It comes in Genesis 9 and Genesis 11. So in Genesis 11, that's where you've got the story of the Tower of Babel, which we'll come back to in a second. And right at the beginning of that, it says that in the beginning, all the humans lived together in one place. And then to translate the Hebrew words, and the land had only one lip. And the word lip means coastline. So the land had only one coastline. Well, what does that look like? That, to me, looks like what we call Pangaea, or there's another name for it, where all the continents are joined up. In Genesis 9, where you've got these mysterious genealogies, there's a verse that says it was in the generation of Peleg that the land divided. If you put those two together, then I wonder if what we have is an ancient ancestral memory of a time when the land stopped being joined together, stopped having only one coastline, and things started moving apart. On our conventional understanding of how long humans have been around, it doesn't fit with our timeline for plate tectonics. Human beings of our intelligence are supposed to date from around 10,000 years ago. Supposed to, I say, because we do have evidence of cities that would have been above sea level no more recently than 10,000 years ago. So obviously we've been around building things much longer than that. If we look for human beings of our design and build, we can go back about 200,000 years. That's not long enough to allow for plate tectonics. But the more I research, and in the research I did for Escaping from Eden, I'm coming to the view that our ancestral memory goes much, much further back than 200,000 years. And I don't think it's inconceivable that our timelines for plate tectonics might be so off that they might match with a time of ancestral memory. So that's just a hint. It's not a super strong case that no one could refute. But when I read those verses, I thought, hang on a minute. What am I being told here? And then when you get to the story of the Tower of Babel, that's one of the moments where when you read Genesis in parallel with the Sumerian stories, they amplify each other. And it appears that what Babel is not a building that's breached building codes, it's a stargate. Babel means a gateway for the powerful ones. And when you read the Sumerian account, what happens at Babel is that 50 technicians dispatch 300 observers from there to their stations in the stars, what today I think we call space stations. So we're actually looking at a very, very advanced species, a highly technological species, and they're the ones who get bombed into a pre-Stone Age state. We often read it as this is the moment when Spanish came along and Italian and French. That's not how it goes. What happens to the humans in that moment is they can no longer communicate to each other verbally. They cannot understand each other. That's not a Spanish plus French scenario. That's a pre-speech scenario. And that's the intention in that moment, to destroy our ability to operate as a technological species, certainly not to operate as a spacefaring one. And so that's a moment where when you read the narratives alongside each other, you're being told a whole lot more information than you might have thought was out there.
Wow.
But that's a great question, Zach. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Zach always does.
Bringing that.
Yeah, well, that's deep now. Oh, wow.
Yeah, isn't it? My brain's already racing thinking about a lot of those concepts.
Yeah, I know exactly. I'm going through the same thing. My second question is, Paul, through your research that you have done in different events that we have seen in our history, have you found any really that parallel with the events described in the fictional novel Childhood's End?
Which novel was that?
I'm not familiar with it either. Childhood's End.
Childhood's End.
Sounds familiar.
I haven't read it. So what does it say?
So to summarize it up, it's where humans are at a point where they're about to go to war with each other via nuclear weapons. And then this race comes down, and slowly over many, many different years, these beings start to integrate themselves. They start becoming accepted, but it's done in a very slow process. Like the first part of the novel centers around this diplomat that works for the UN. He's their contact between these beings as well as planet Earth. But the strange thing is that this diplomat, he can't see his other primary contact. He's basically in a room where there's a wall. It's almost like one of those interrogation rooms where you can see one side, but the other side can't see the other. But apparently, like, he's able to sneak in a device where he can get a brief flash of the individual on the other side, but he doesn't reveal it. And then 50 years after the fact, they reveal themselves and they appear to look what we would consider to be like the devil. You know, these red creatures with horns, wings, and all that. But they're a benevolent race, and they're there to make the human race more advanced. And I won't spoil the ending.
All right.
It, but
I've got to read that
that's
book.
where it goes.
Sounds like they're trying to like convince
I
you.
have
Like,
to read that book, but it has echoes of what one might read in Greek mythology and in Norse mythology and in ancient Indian narratives, where there is this coexistence of an advanced species with human beings. And when we read some of these ancient stories and observe ancient behaviors as best we can archaeologically, I think sometimes we assume that if there was an ET presence here, that they had a face-to-face relationship with us. And I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. If I go back to how the Sumerian story runs, it seems possible to me that in the distant past, our ancestors were colonized with by an advanced species from another planet. And that when we were colonized, the advanced species took over. They were the authority. They were the kings. They were the educators. They were the police force. And then just as we do when we colonize each other's countries, they withdrew. And when we withdraw from having invaded somewhere, as long as we've set the commodity prices, as long as we have a hand in the banking system, so on and so forth, we can go home to our own country and still benefit from being at the top of the economic tree in the country that we had colonized. Now, all the empires have done that: Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, British, American. It's how we do it. And I wonder if that's analogous to what happened to us. So there may become a point where you've got a priesthood, let's say, we'll call it that is the intermediary between the occupying force and the rest of us. So I wonder, with that wonderful book you described, Zach, the more I research, the more I believe there is less fiction in the world than I thought, and that our fiction is in fact full of cultural memory, full of retellings of things that happened in the distant past. I can well believe that the book you describe is somewhat in that category. So I'm going to read it and see what I think.
It does sound good. I sounded familiar, like I've heard of it before, but I haven't read it. Well, thank you, Zach, for calling in.
And that story, of course, you'll know this, Jason, has been repeated more than once in Star Trek.
Oh, yes.
Where the people are being managed by an entity that they never see and that may have left thousands of years previously.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like the Jungian archetypes. You know, it's something like ingrained in us, these concepts, because, like you said, it can go back to the beginnings of humanity. And more than 200,000 years ago, we've got, you said, 5 resets. How long ago could that go back?
A long, long way. Zach, you and I should be Facebook friends. I'd love to continue our conversation.
Absolutely, my man. And by the way, also, Sci-Fi Channel, they did do a mini series on it a couple years back. I definitely found it definitely does like really
That's
parallel
why it
really
sounds.
well.
That's why it sounds familiar.
Right.
I remember that now.
Cool. Thank you so much for mentioning that.
You're very welcome, Paul. Thank you so much for answering my questions. Everybody, you have a good night, okay?
You too.
Thank you.
Well, you mentioned about them, like you being colonizers and setting up the infrastructure and everything, and then leaving and reaping the benefits in a way. They've talked a lot about, I think Stishin talked about this a lot when it comes to Sumerians of like mining for gold. And the ancient mines that we found, that
I know.
Why were humans even fascinated with gold before,
Yeah, it's really intriguing. In Genesis, when we're told about the location of Eden, we're told that it's in a handy place for some local minerals. And the minerals are high grade, it says. Well, why on earth would Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden need to know where the key mineral deposits were?
Right.
Where is that in there? And you know that that's a vestige of some other story. And then you mention evidence of prehistoric mining in southern Africa. Mines are found from time to time that appear to go as far back as 200,000 years ago, at least, in fact. I've heard people say they could be older. That's really intriguing when you put that against our timeline, because conventional science is telling us that there were hominids of our exact design and build living on planet Earth 200,000 years ago. Not as clever as us, not clever enough to farm, but certainly clever enough to work in someone else's mine.
Right.
So who's the someone else, I suppose, is the $64,000 question. And so I would suggest it's not humans who are interested in gold. It's whoever we were working for.
Right. And it's now been ingrained in us because that's what we were designed for. Our original purpose was to mine gold. And that's why we've had a fascination with it, because it would have served us really no purpose in the Stone Age. I mean, gold would do us no good. We'd have, it's shiny. Okay. There's a lot of shiny things. We would have no idea its value, but we've been fascinated. It's been the currency for as man can tell, as time can tell. It's what we were bred to do, I guess, is be fascinated or want gold.
Exactly.
And I think, there's, you talk about archetypes and, or I mentioned archetypes, but the different ways that these stories have been retold and how they're still being told in fiction. And I think of Stargate, when you're talking about the Tower of Babel, how it could have been a gateway and then destroyed and everybody spreads. That's kind of what happens in Stargate. I don't know if you've ever seen the original Stargate movie or the TV show and all that. I'm a geek. I know.
Long time ago.
But they had these gateways, and then when it shut down, the civilization starts remembering what was there as gods.
Yes, I think that's right. And very often, I think what we've got in ancient narratives are memories that we're retrieving. And as I read them, researching Escaping from Eden, that's what it felt like, that we as a species have forgotten traumas, but we do have memories of them recorded. And when you look at the accounts of, the text I know best is Genesis. Those key moments in Genesis 1-11, they are all stories of traumas in our ancestors' lives, in our story as Homo sapiens. And each one of them is kind of a mix of what we've remembered and what we've forgotten. And as you start reading the Popol Vuh, Mesoamerican stories, African stories, Greek, Norse, Indian, there's that same feeling. It's almost like a person with amnesia getting flashbacks of what had happened to them.
Other interesting aspect of this, again, too, is it seems like with a different, with the Bible especially, but the different, you go back all the way to Sumerian times, and then the Vedas with the gods fighting each other. Do you think there's been certain aliens, like one type of alien in control of humanity for thousands of years, and suddenly another alien race comes in and says, "Get out, we're in control now. This is our gold mine," or you guys can't use these people as miners anymore. We're coming in and we're fixing all this, like the Federation would do if somebody was taking advantage of some primitive planet.
Yes, I think that's a great question. Certainly the presence that seems to be represented in the Sumerian stories, it would be difficult to point to something more current and say, well, they're obviously still here.
Right.
I'm not sure that presence is here any longer.
Right.
I could see it another way, because a lot of the systems that were set up among the Sumerians are the systems that are still here. So we still use all the banking arrangements that we learned back then. We still use cosmology, mathematics. We still have a minute of 60 seconds, an hour of 60 minutes, so on and so forth. So I could see it the other way, but I certainly think in terms of who's dominating the human story, yes, it might be a different presence from age to age, and who was here 200,000 years ago might not be who is here now.
I mean, if you read the Bible and like Revelations, it almost seems like we're on a contract. Like there's like a certain set time before, you know, okay, time's up, time for God to come back and, you know, punish the sinners, or however you want to read Revelations. But it seems like there's a contract, and there, you know, like, you know, the devil is bound for 1,000 years. So many different ways people read Revelations, but it does seem like there's like a contract set up for God to come back.
It's very possible. Certainly, I believe there's some kind of arrangement that we're living under, just as there was in the days when we talk about the Sky Council, this body of diverse beings that occurs in narratives around the world. I think, yes, we could be in a similar situation today. And yes, there might be arrangements that include time frames. I think it's very possible. It's not something I'd picked up from Revelation. Maybe you've spent more time in that book than I have.
There's no time. You know, I'm definitely not. You probably know a lot more about Revelation than I do. But as far as I took it, you know, no way man can know the time or day that it'll happen. We don't know the time frame of the contract. That's not revealed in Revelations. But it does seem like there is a contract. Like there is a time, you know, that where, you know, God supposedly comes back and kicks the devil and his minions' butt and, you know, ends the world and we move on to heaven or go to hell. You know, that's Revelation possible. Been translated, but.
And I think that's another reason why some people find acknowledgement of ET presence is really unsettling.
Right.
Because we are sort of saying, first of all, we're not sure what's going on. We think somebody might know what's going on, but most of us don't know. And we're not in charge. We're not in control. We are in some kind of an arrangement by presences that could overpower us. Well, that's not very cheerful news. And I do wonder if some of the policies of secrecy are in place because of those issues, not because of panic about the existence of ETs, but the disturbance that people would have thinking, well, how's the show being run? In what agendas have been served by this secrecy? Where do any of us fit in this picture? And how important are any of us if we weren't even allowed to know? That's why I think they're doing soft disclosure, so that there isn't this one big moment where we all find out. I think the idea of ET presence is being drip fed to us, so that in a generation's time, we all take it for granted that there's something going on, and we'll learn a bit at a time what that means. Well, I think soft disclosure is a deliberate choice to avoid a big moment.
Well, what's you might remember this, the famous study they did where they basically determined that, you know, if somehow we were to reveal aliens, that, you know, society would completely fall apart, people would lose their minds, and it'd be awful.
That's right. I've forgotten the name of that report.
Me too.
But that was
totally slipped from my mind at the moment. But
it was a report that was commissioned for government, wasn't it? And that was that was what came back.
And that was what, the 60s or 70s, I think they did.
Yeah.
60s. So it seems like they found that and they said, okay, what are we going to do? Because we're eventually it's going to come out. It's out of our hands. Eventually this is going to come out. We have time. So what are we going to do? We're going to feed it into Hollywood. You know, we're going to slowly drip, you know, the technology into the society so we can kind of catch up, and we're going to slowly like get people used to the concept. That makes a lot of sense to me. What if you look back at everything, how it's gone down, you know, where we're at today.
I think it's a shame about that report, because I really feel the problem now is the secrecy.
Well, at the time the report was probably right, but now we've changed. You know, we're a lot more open and a lot more accepting to this idea.
Well, we were open in the 1940s, if you think about it.
Well, yeah, true.
And then this 70 years of secrecy has created a problem of how do we change that without a phenomenal amount of anger and questions being asked about hidden layers of government. I think that's a big part of the embarrassment around the issue.
See, I think, I mean, everybody's familiar with 1947 Roswell crash, but I think there was other evidence of crashes like, I've had the guest on here about that in 1941 in Missouri.
Yeah.
The crash then, and even the 1920s, and you go back to Aurora, Texas, late 1800s. There's possibility our government knew before 1947. It seems like it because they were like a little bit prepared. It seemed like maybe a little unprepared with their news press, but they were prepared, showing up to clean it up. That they were somewhere aware of this presence before even 1947. I always wondered if, remember Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio broadcast. I always wondered if that was like one of their first tests to the public, to see how would the public react if they really thought there was an alien invasion. What better way than radio, back in the day when people didn't have television or anything, and it was just radio, and only certain people are going to hear this broadcast, tuning in and not hearing the first part that this is a dramatization. They missed that part. And next thing you know, people are, going a little bit nuts that they think the aliens are coming. I always wondered if that could have been a test by our government.
These things were handled openly until 1947. And I think that back in the day, we were showing certainly the great American public more respect by handling it openly, by saying there's been another incident, letting it go in the papers, by saying we're investigating this, we're trying to find out what these are. To me, that was showing respect to an adult population. And then in 1947, for some reason, a decision was taken that this all had to be classified.
And treat us like idiots.
National Security Act and treat us like idiots. And not just that, but death threats over generations of families to try and keep it quiet. That's the real scandal of it.
Or deaths.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, to threaten the witnesses and to threaten their children and their grandchildren. So there's something that begs a question. What did happen in 1947 that was regarded as a proportionate response when we could previously acknowledge there were things flying around that we didn't know what they were? And this is one of the things that really motivated Alan Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon. I find his testimonies about ET contact really intriguing, because here's a guy who is under all kinds of official secrets laws. So there'll be heaps of stuff he can't say. But what he can say is that he wants to honor all his townspeople who knew what they saw, honor the witnesses. And he said he was very interested in us as a worldwide species beginning to think through the implications of the technology that we could have. So he's all but saying in statement form, we have been in contact, we have technology, there should be disclosure. And that's how he's saying it, all the while ring-fenced by these official secrets laws. But I really felt his passion when he spoke for his fellow townspeople from Roswell, knowing how much those families had suffered because of those gag orders and those death threats. And so I'm very happy to be living now at a time when those policies have gone and where people are able to report what they've seen, even if they're officials in the US Navy, and not have that kind of repercussion threatened or visited upon them. That's a very significant change.
Well, I think it was more than just what I was trying to say before. Is I think it was, there was death threats, and then there was actual death. There was people who possibly were killed to keep their. I mean, even you look at Hillenkotter. Was it Hillenkotter that? No, wasn't Hillenkotter. I forgot from the original Majestic 12. That went out the window. They pushed him out. I'm totally drawing a blank of the name.
Oh goodness, yes. I
totally draw a blank of the name now.
Sad story. I don't remember the name either.
That sounds like somebody was going to release the information. I'm totally drawing the blank of the name. It's famous, and they pushed him out a window for it. That's what it seems like. It could have happened. You know, one of the things we haven't even touched upon tonight, and we're going to get up at our last commercial break, but maybe we'll go more into it. But talking about before Roswell, you know, the instances, you know, the Catholic Church, like, you know, we're going back to 2009 and Benedict, their own Roswell, in my opinion, was Fatima.
Yes, in 1917.
Yes, and I think that could be a big influence to why they came out, because they still have information on that. We don't know.
It's still suppressed. We're still not allowed to know.
Yeah, the secrets of Fatima. I mean, and there was photographic evidence that, you know, people had back, you know, during Fatima. You see the classic picture, you see people looking up and you don't see what they're looking at, but there are some photos out there of a disc in the sky and the descriptions of a silver disc. You know, everybody focuses on the whole the Virgin Mary, you know, coming and talking to the children and all that, you know, aspect of that. But if you get deep into the story, it's so much more. It's so much more than, and it sounds like more alien. Just like it's like what's ironic about it is that we're still doing it. We're doing what they did back in the day. We're still doing it. Something that happened in modern times, 1917.
Yes,
right.
I think
Something happened in modern times. We're still, the Catholic Church was still able to gloss over it and make it a religious event.
Yes. And in 2009, they don't make any mention of that.
Right.
They're wanting to say, and I do applaud Pope Benedict and his team for saying we need to put these questions back on the table and talk about ET family and the possibilities of contact. They said that, but they didn't say, by the way, our bad.
Right.
We distorted something that happened, because again, it's the silence that becomes embarrassing, that becomes the political problem.
Sometimes though, for America, sometimes they should have just kept silent, because like when they came back in the 90s, there's a couple times our government's come back to try to re-explain Roswell, and their re-explanations are even more silly.
Yeah.
Even more silly, like Project Mogul.
Better not to say anything.
Yeah, it's like you're just making it worse. You're just making it worse. We're going to go to our last commercial break here. Phone lines are still open: 219-230-4444, 262-59419, or Skype ID OOJBlandOO or JBland Paranormal Soup. Call in. Got a question or experience? I'd love to hear it. Call into the show. But we'll be right back after this short commercial break.
Intercepted transmission of unknown origin.
Transmission? Out here?
SOS.
Human.
Unknown.
Alien. Certificate X. Exclusive engagement at the Odeon Leicester Square. Now.
Any systematized transmission indicating a possible intelligent origin must be investigated.
In space, no one can hear you scream.
The international chart-topping Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest has been described as terrifyingly real, a must-read, shocking and chilling brilliance, genuinely worrying, utterly frightening. Don't read before bed. Described as one of the spookiest writers out there, best-selling author G.L. Davies presents Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest, the true paranormal account that is shocking the world. Dare you enter? Dare you read? Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, and wherever books are sold. Pray you never have to live there.
Phantasm, the film that puts the fun in funeral. And as for a fiendish story, it does have a burial plot. Come prepared to scream, because if this one doesn't scare you, you're already dead. Phantasm from Avco Embassy Pictures. Rated R under 17, not admitted without parent. Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do voices from beyond the cold case files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
This fall, a new hard-hitting police drama is coming to Friday night. He was a well-to-do cop transferred to a troubled precinct downtown. His new partner is a space traveler with a passion for justice. It's Yuppie and the Alien.
Look, you might vaporize dissidents in Alpha Centauri, but in this precinct, we do it by the book.
I'm so terribly sorry, Captain.
Goog, I'm sorry. Don't miss this one-of-a-kind police drama. They're fighting crime the hard way, in designer clothes, with $250,000 sports car and a UFO.
Partner, let's go cruise in the car and look moody.
One tough downtown precinct, two outsiders doing things their way. Yuppie and the Alien on VBC.
If you are interested in discovering the truth about the paranormal and want to hear from leading researchers in the field, join Justin Brown on his 3 weekly shows named My Paranormal Soapbox, Necromancer Live Show, and the Supernatural Symposium, live on Facebook, YouTube, and
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to the Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
In the beginning, the universe was created. This made a lot of people very angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move.
Tonight's guest, we've been talking to Paul Wallace, author of Escaping from Eden. It's coming out April 24th. You can pre-order it now. I cannot wait to read this book. I'm telling you, because this is, like I said, one of my, definitely by far my favorite subject. Like I said, people think I'm a paranormal investigator. It would be ghosts. No, it's the ancient aliens, because it's something I've been obsessed with since I was a kid. Even when I think even my freshman year of high school, I had a theology class. And they told us, write a fictional story about one of your favorite biblical characters, or, in their perspective. You know what I wrote? I wrote a story about Jesus as an alien, and it was all from this perspective of being an alien. I got an A+ on that. My theology teacher was awesome. She said, very imaginative. That's what she wrote on it. It's something not my religion, but it's what I tell my kids when they go to the Sunday school. They've gone, to church here and there, and they go, Dad, why don't you go? I go, it's not that I don't believe that there's a God. I have a different concept of what our history might be, and I don't believe everything in that book is actually God. That's just how I feel about it. I want to get more out of our guest Paul. He is a Christian. How all this knowledge affects his faith, and how his faith is molded by it. I really want to get into that in this last half of the show. But you can call in tonight if you have your own questions about that at 219-230-4444 or at 260-225-9419 or Skype ID OOJBland OO or Skype ID JBland Paranormal Soup. Call in. Ask your questions tonight, or tell us about an experience you had with the UFO aliens. Or have you read Chariots of the Gods? What are your thoughts? Do you believe ancient aliens are in the Bible? I'd love to hear your thoughts tonight. Call in, but let's get back to our guests. Well, thank you, Paul, for hanging in with us for one more half hour of the show. We were talking about the Fatima towards the end of the break, and oh shoot, I took him off. There we go. Whoops, hit the wrong button. Sorry. We're talking about Fatima, and in that, the three children, they have this encounter in it, and to them, what they see, their own religious perceptions, they see this as the Virgin Mary coming to speak to them. Do you think the aliens purposely, even now, would come to us and present themselves as a religious figure? Or is that just all our perception put on upon them?
I think both is possible. Fundamentally, of course, we always interpret what we see. There's a beautiful movie called Witness of Another World by Argentinian movie maker Alan Stevelman. And he depicts a close encounter that happened to a boy of 12 years old back in the 1970s. And then it follows that guy as an adult as he processes what happened to him all those years before. And they depict the close. Have you seen the movie?
I've seen it. I know it. I want to see it. I saw a preview of this and it looked really good. Yes. Okay. Sorry.
It's a beautiful movie. Dude, yes. Absolutely. I think everybody should see it. It's a really beautiful movie, and it goes really deeply into the impact on a person of a close encounter. But when they depict the encounter as the boy described it, first of all, he described the craft he saw as a hut or a tractor, because he didn't have any other frame of reference to describe what he was seeing. Right. And then there's a moment when he went up into the craft and he remembered it as climbing up a ladder. And you think, really? Do UFOs have ladders? Wouldn't they have some other technology? But it's how a young boy processed the experience according to all the other things he'd experienced in life. So I think that happens when we have an experience that's out of the box. We can only say, well, it was like this. And so there'll be a layer of interpretation. And so that might explain why there's a religious gloss on some experiences. Then it is entirely possible that beings presenting themselves to us use our subconscious to communicate with us, and they will bring up from our own subconscious images, understandings that will help them make a connection with us. I believe that does happen. And then, of course, I have had an experience, and now an authority is telling me what I saw and didn't see. And I think all those three patterns happen.
It makes you wonder, it could speak to the aliens' intent if they're truly honest and open, like, hey, I'm not your God, I'm not Virgin Mary, I'm this. Or if they are faking it, then they seem kind of like jerks if they're lying, to false perceive. I mean, some people think it's a disappointing ending to the movie Contact. But her seeing her father, if people haven't seen that, at the end, she meets the alien. I remember there's a joke in South Park. She's like, I watched the whole movie Contact just to find out the alien's her father at the end. No, it's just how the alien is able to make her feel at ease and perceive herself, at the end of that movie.
And in the movie Contact, Carl Sagan's movie, when this other dimensional being wants to communicate with Jodie Foster, he appears as her father so that she can have the experience, have the conversation, and then process it later. So there's another, for instance.
That's what I meant. That's, you know, people are like, oh, it's disappointing. It's her father. No, it's just the way the aliens could communicate with her, put her at ease. Yeah, so she could process all this incredible revelations. Better book than movie. I'm sorry, as usual. But I was fascinated by it. I read Contact like a billion times in junior high. And, you know, that's South Park. I don't know if you ever see it with Mr. Garrison makes that rip. I'm like, hey, I like Contact. Don't rip on it. You know, that's how aliens are gonna, you know, do it. You know, Zach's example, the aliens in that book, Child's End, or I'm gonna have to find out what that book is, are demonic looking, but they're really nice. You know, so they can't show themselves to us. You know, speaking of different aliens and the species, I mean, you've obviously come across all the different encounters people have had with aliens. There's different species. You got the Greys, you got the reptilians, you got the Aryans. How do you think that plays? Do you see any references to any of what modern day ufology and talking about aliens to the Bible?
I think that when you get into some of the world's older texts, including the biblical texts, we've got so used to reading them through a particular lens. And so with the Bible, for instance, we've read it with a worldview of there's God, the devil, angels, demons, human beings, animal, vegetable, mineral, and nothing else. When you read it with a more open eye, when you translate the word Elohim in the plural, you realize there's a whole diversity of beings being talked about in the Bible from the get-go. Some nice, some not so nice. Some beings who are described as angels, a word that doesn't tell you what they are. It tells you what their function is. And then some that might be described as demons. Some are messengers, that's right. And I think within that spectrum, you've got accounts that you could align with accounts today of beings interacting with us, some who are helpful and some who are not. And so I wonder if there's more of that kind of story that we've missed because we've read it in a religious way.
We've always been looking through it through that lens, and we always try to apply those concepts to these experiences. Yeah. But now we're having these modern... Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. I'm just thinking for myself. I've been a believer since I was 17, so that's quite some time. And in that time, I've had various experiences, some quite out of the box, some what you would describe as paranormal experiences. And early on in my life as a believer, I only had those few categories to interpret what was happening. Is this God? Is this the devil? Is this an angel? Is there a demon? Now I'm realizing that some of those experiences were probably experiences of completely other kinds of being that don't fall into any of those categories.
Alien.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, you said you've been a Christian of faith since you were 17. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
So
that's right.
Doing all this research, exploring this, looking deep into the meanings of the Bible and what it really meant, and finding all these connections and finding that, you know, that the Old Testament is not really talking about God. How is your faith? What do you consider your faith now as a Christian? How do you line all that together?
Yeah. Well, I think as a preacher, I've always been very aware of these anomalies that were the vestiges of an earlier story. And I was always aware of the problem of trying to reconcile the morality of some of these old stories with the morality we see in Jesus. And I really think anyone who thinks Jesus is showing us what God is like has to have major questions about some of the stories in the Old Testament, because God can't be like that if he's like Jesus. He can't be a genociding person. He can't be double-minded. He can't be deceiving. He can't be vindictive. He can't be that cannot be right. And so that's a reason all of its own to go back and say what's really happening in these stories. But the real eye-opener for me in researching Escaping from Eden was to realize that right at the beginning of Christianity, there were these church fathers who affirmed this other narrative of beginnings, a narrative of human origins. There were these church fathers who said there was an external intervention in our evolution as a species, that we live in a populated universe, and that believe quite things that sound quite new, the idea of a holographic universe, the idea of a conscious universe, the idea of consciousness preceding material, which is what quantum is beginning to show us. That was all part of the conversation because Plato had made it so, and these church fathers understood that. So for me, my whole picture of God has really opened up,
right,
in a much bigger way, in a much more positive way. And the result of all the research and rethinking that went into Escaping from Eden means I've come away thinking, well, God is actually more amazing than ever I thought before. And it's a better Jesus than I thought before, because I've got him out of that meta-narrative of control and worship and obedience and realized, no, actually, he's a more interesting and affirming personality than that.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope people will get. It will, I mean, for some, when they read Escaping from Eden, it's going to be a shock. It's going to shoot some sacred cows. But I think where it reaches in the end is, hey, there's something more wonderful going on here than I thought. And I have actually done something bad by excusing awful behavior because I thought God did it. I've got to unravel all of that and kind of start again. And for me, that's been a really positive experience. It's a little bit like, I liken it to the stages of grief. How does it begin? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I think you go through all of those when your worldview shifts. And that happened for me through the writing of Escaping from Eden. And my hope is that I will carry the reader through that same journey.
See, for me personally, I don't call myself a Christian because of all the connotations that come with it. I do believe that Jesus Christ existed. And I've read, I always read the New Testament to the Old Testament and be like, this is something completely different than this. In my mind, the Old Testament was ancient aliens. You can ask my wife. I've said that since she's known me. I was like, Old Testament's ancient aliens. New Testament, I'm cool with, but don't tell me the Old Testament's God. Because if that's God, God's a jerk and I don't care. I'll go to hell. I don't want anything to do with him. New Testament, totally cool with. Most totally cool with. What Jesus has to say to me is there are a lot of parables. Some people say, why does he just come right out and say it? Well, he might have, but we've translated and rewritten it and cut stuff out. But I think there's a kernel of real good knowledge there of how to live in the New Testament. I don't see that in the Old Testament.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with you. I think that's very honest. The other place I get to by the end of Escaping from Eden is I'm really interested and excited and hopeful about our capacities as human beings, because the narratives that talk about prehistoric contact with ETs and that talk about us being engineered by them or genetically modified, many of them have an account where they upgraded us to here and then up to here and then up to here, and then they downgraded us so that they could manage us. What's exciting about that is that it really matches some of what we're finding in science today. First of all, it addresses the question of, why do we have so much brain and use so little of it? We all think, hang on, we've got capacities here that we're not tapping. Right. And if you go to the Popol Vuh, it says the reason we were downgraded was because we could do things like remote view. We had things like precognition and telepathy, and we weren't very easily managed. We were too much like the powerful ones with all of that. And so they downgraded us so that they could work with us. The Popol Vuh is very, very honest about that. It's there in the Greek narrative as well. It's there in Genesis as well. And what interests me is, first of all, that all the cultures that produce those stories, they've always had shamanic and mystical modalities to try and switch the inhibitors off and get us operating at that higher level once again. And I would recommend anyone to go away and Google acquired savant syndrome, which is studied by real peer-reviewed neuroscientists around the world, cases where a trauma to the brain or the central nervous system unlocks phenomenal skills. You've only got to read a few of those cases to think, wait a minute, what are advanced skills doing in our brains? Why are they in the off position? And can we switch them on without having an accident? And the world's mythologies speak to that. They explain it. They explain why we have those higher capacities. They explain why they're turned off. Neuroscience can't really explain it. It describes it, and there are some very well catalogued accounts of it. But I think when you read those cases, you realize we all have the potential to operate at this higher level in terms of our abilities, and then in terms of the insight we bring to our lives. Can we switch them on? And that's where I end up in Escaping from Eden by the time we get to the end of the book.
Oh man, I really want to read this book so bad, because that brings to mind, like, I remember, I mean, you talk about head trauma, like people who ended up having a new accent, like,
or a new language.
Head trauma, a new language,
a whole new language.
Mathematics. I remember a 2020 special, a guy gets, like, he had a head trauma, and like he's just like that with any kind of like number calculation. It's like that should be impossible.
Yes,
but his brain could do it,
After I had my accident where I had the really bad head damage and the, big lump and everything that grew off the back and all those problems, I noticed that my abilities and everything just seemed to get clearer and stronger. And I noticed a lot of changes after the accident.
Jamie, I've heard that from so many people, people who've had head traumas, also people who've had strokes. Often in the aftermath of that, they suddenly find that they have capacities that they didn't have before, what people might call heightened psychic abilities that they did not have before, greater abilities of perception. And, I just hope everyone who's had that kind of experience tells all their friends about it, because you can't go back to life as normal when you realize this is happening to people.
Well, look at autism. Autistic children can do some, there's so many different levels of autism, and there's severe autism, but there's levels of autism where people have, they can't socially interact well with people or communicate well, but they can have an extreme ability for photo memory and numbers. And I even seen it with a severe autistic child in our family who doesn't have even able the ability to speak, but he could go onto a tablet and find old toys he had from when he was a little child, find a video of it somehow, on YouTube, just this abilities, like these other hypersensitive abilities that autistic children seem to have, seems to be some kind of genetic thing regurgitating through our system.
Well, not only that, but you see like magnificent piano players, kids that can just hear a song and then pick it up and just play it without ever having any classes.
Savants.
Amazing things.
I was really intrigued when I started researching acquired savant syndrome to find that the neuroscientists who talk about it, when they describe cases like that, they say what's happening is that there is a disinhibition of certain brain functions. And I find that language very interesting. As soon as I hear that, I ask, what are inhibitors doing in our brains in the first place?
Who put them there?
They can be knocked off. And you can see that sometimes it's in cases of dementia that phenomenal skill gets unlocked in another area. And it's because the inhibitors aren't working properly. That's mind-boggling.
Right. I mean, with dementia, I've had it in my family with Alzheimer's, but I've had on my father's side dementia as well. A dementia a patient or person could, be reliving an exact moment in their past and time that, if they weren't with dementia would barely remember it, but somehow their brain locks into this moment in time and they're remembering these different things and not relating to the reality at the time. It's amazing what the brain can do.
That's true. Sometimes it's memory, like you described. Sometimes it's perception, and the person will suddenly say the most incredibly deep, profound, insightful thing that seems to have come from nowhere.
My grandfather, it was, I guess, a couple hours before his death. He hadn't spoken in years. I think it was 2 years since the last time he had spoken. The day he died, he my aunt, I guess this is a story in the family, rolled him up to the window. Like she did let him go look out the window. I guess this is something she did. And she rolled him up the window and he kind of just laughed and goes, "Life's a joke." After 2 years of not speaking, and then he died. That just stuck with me, you know.
Oh my goodness.
But, you know, the other thing, you know, talk about genetic manipulation too. Look at the Bible and how long people lived, you know, like Methuselah and what was I think Ezekiel, you know, a number of biblical figures lived accordingly longer than humans do now.
Yes, that is really intriguing. And it actually correlates with timelines from the Sumerian stories, where there's a document called the King's List. And there are various copies of it that exist, and they're all slightly different to each other, but they all throw the same spanner in the works, and that is that the lifelines of these prehistoric kings were thousands of years old. And then after the flood, because it's in their narrative as well, the timelines start coming down, and then you've got human lifespans. And in their story, in the Popol Vuh, in Genesis, there is the moment where the powerful ones are deciding how long the human beings should live, and they decide to limit that as well. It's another really interesting correlation across all the narratives that exist around the world. And you have to explain that King's List. We know what the units of time mean, and it's among all these other documents that include banking arrangements, contracts, shopping lists, inventories. Here's the list of the kings. And again, there's no metaphor. There's no moral of the story.
They told it as it was.
Why is that timeline there?
You know, we're almost out of time, but the other interesting aspect we can get into is the focus on bloodlines. You talk about kings, that's all about bloodlines. You know, the marriages between royal families and all that, going back to Sumerian times. The focus on bloodlines is what was so important in keeping certain bloodlines in power. You know, what was their connection, you know.
And the big mess that is in so many ancient mythologies is when the bloodline gets messed up and there's hybridization going on that's not been authorized.
Right.
And,
I mean,
you know, you think of the story of the Princess and the Pea. I don't know if you know it, but it all assumes this idea that if you're part of the ruling classes, you can't be breeding with ordinary human beings.
Right.
Well, where on earth does that idea come from?
Right. Because they're trying to keep an alien gene pure, maybe, or, you know, a hybridization pure. I mean, look, it got, you know, with the Hebrews being the chosen people, you know, chosen by God, Yahweh. These are my people. Which I always thought, if these are your people, what about all the other people you're supposed to be responsible for creating for? Why did you just pick these people? Why did you just create more people if you just wanted these ones? You know, so another thing that always confused me, which makes a lot more sense when you throw Elohim and that idea of plural into it.
And that comes from that henotheistic period where there are a number of ruling entities, but you people, you follow Yahweh. It's embedded into the 10 Commandments, which says have no other powerful ones, don't bow down to them, don't even draw
recognizing there are.
Recognizing that there are, exactly. And then in Joshua, it says don't worship the powerful ones of your Sumerian heritage from Abraham and Sarah, cut them off. Follow only Yahweh. Again, an acknowledgement that there's this plurality of higher beings in the picture.
Yeah, it's totally been there the whole time, you know, and we're recognizing it now. We're more open to it now. Do you think we'll 10, 20, 100 years from now, you know, even if we don't have any kind of opening or disclosure or contact, that we'll start opening up to these ideas more? In our faith and religion?
If everyone reads Escaping from Eden, and if everyone follows my YouTube channel, the Paul Wallace channel, then everyone will know. But I think a lot of people, to be serious, are joining the dots, and there's far more of this conversation happening than I think has happened in a long, long time.
This is stuff I've talked with my parents with for years. You know, like I said, I grew up in an open household. These are concepts I've thought about for so long. And it's really great to see more people like you know, putting work out there, you know, talking about somebody who has a Christian faith, opening to this and talking about this, I've encountered a Catholic priests that are open to the idea, before 2009, that were open to the idea of aliens and the possibility, so it's within all the religions. It's definitely, people are asking the right questions. I think we're heading the right direction.
Definitely.
I hope.
I mean, I take my hat off to Eric von Daniken for making this conversation mainstream back in the 60s and 70s. And I certainly hope that Escaping from Eden and others will do the same in this generation. And so this is a conversation we should all be participating in.
I think it also takes, it's not just religion that needs to open up to this. It's academia, archaeology. Archaeology has its own dogmas in a way, and its own looking the other way to obvious evidence that needs to change as well. We need the science, the facts to back it up. And there's plenty there to be discovered, but we have an academia that wants to keep a narrative going, just like a religion would.
Yes, academia can be very conservative. Peer review can be very cruel sometimes. And so it can take a long time to really absorb anomalies in the story. But I do hope with the new technology that we have, the soil magnetization, soil conductivity, the emergence of civilizations we know nothing about, I do hope that will begin to produce a generation of archaeologists who say we're rewriting the book right now.
Let's hope. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for being on the show. I'd love to have you again, because at the end there, I listed off a bunch of things we didn't get too deep into. I wanted to get to, but that's...
We'll do it again.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, but that is it, guys. That's the end of the show. We will be back next Sunday. Same bad time, same bad channel. Our guest will be returning guest, Robbie Thomas, psychic profiler. One of my favorite guests, and hopefully I'll be meeting him for the first time, I think in July. I got to get my tickets for Crown Point Jail, which I've investigated. Robbie Thomas is going to be there. Hopefully I better get that before I have him on the show. He's going to give me hell. But Robbie Thomas returning to the show next Sunday, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Central, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. 11 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you so much, Paul. Everyone, see you next Sunday. Have a great night.
Thank you.